Welcome to How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No with Maria Arapakis. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Maria. Maria Arapakis is one of the nation's top trainers. Career Track seminar participants have made her one of our highest-rated trainers. She has earned 2 advanced degrees in psychology, and she's trained thousands of people on image building and communication skills. Her services are sought by many of America's largest companies, including the Gap stores, Dow Chemical, and many government agencies. Listen carefully, relate what you hear to yourself, and take notes so that after the program, you have an action plan you can implement immediately. Remember, it's not what you know, but what you do with what you know that counts. Cassette 1 is Maria's live Setting Limits pep talk, which focuses on the high price we pay when we fail to set limits and the enormous payoff when we do. Cassettes 2, 3, and 4 of this program focus on why you need to set limits and teach you effective limit-setting skills. Now, how to speak up, set limits, and say no with Maria Arapakis.
I'm going to be talking with you tonight about I think one of the most fascinating and complex areas of assertion in your own life: setting limits, saying no, letting people know where you draw the line and how you want to be treated by them. And what I want to do is, obviously we don't have the kind of time where I can get into skill development, but I want to provoke you to think more about limits in your own life and what they mean to you, and to stir you up a little bit about them so that you make it a high priority in your own personal growth work. And I hope it will happen by what I share with you. I want to share 10 points about setting limits with you. Now, I don't want to be depressing, but I'm going to start out with a sad story. About 6 months ago, I ended a 5-year relationship, and so I'm back being single again. Now, that's not the sad story I'm going to tell you about. That's another sad story. Actually, it's not even a sad story. It's a happy story, ultimately. I'm even enjoying being single again these days. How many of you are single? Put your hand way up. Whoa! How many of you are single and even enjoy being single? How many of you are single and whether you enjoy it or not want to be in a relationship? How many of you are in a relationship and want to be single? Well, anyway. Okay, well, being single again, okay, I'm out there meeting men. So about a month ago, this is a sad story. About a month ago, I meet this guy named Russ. That's all I'm going to tell you about his name. And so we get our first get-together set up, and it's that getting to know each other stage. And during the course of the evening, he starts in telling me about his relationship with his mother. Russ is Italian. His family's Italian background. He grew up with his mother and his maternal grandfather raising him. His father and mother divorced when he was quite young. And throughout his childhood, his father was portrayed to him as the devil. Now, he's named for his father, by the way. You can imagine what this does for a kid's identity crisis when he's a teenager. So Russ tells me that a few days before, his father had called him out of the blue. After 10 years, he hadn't heard from his father. He really doesn't know his father at all. And he called him on the phone, and they had this great 2-hour phone conversation that was very touching. And after the phone conversation, Russ said he actually cried, and I'm thinking how wonderful and terrific that they're reconnected. And in the phone conversation, his father said he really wants to get to know Russ and get together with him and develop a relationship with him now. Russ is 35, by the way, a younger man. I like that trend. I can get right with that one. I think that one, I'll go for it. Anyway, it's just linear age anyway. It's a fiction. So he's 35, okay. So his father says this to him, and he tells his father, no, I'm sorry, I can't see you. You know why? Because his mother has forbidden him to see his father. And he is not going to see his father because of this. And she has threatened to excommunicate him, quote unquote, if he does. And she told him, if you love me, you will not see your father. And he cannot upset her, he said. I'm thinking, my lordy, this man has serious limit-setting problems. We're talking primitive here. And it gets worse. Then he tells me that that's why whenever a woman ever tells him, I love you, he freaks and disappears. And why he has never in his entire life ever said, I love you to anybody. Well, I was speechless by this point. Although I can assure you my mind was busily scratching his name off of my list of possible candidates for Mr. Right. Forget this one.
First date.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could tell you a lot of sad stories. A lot of sad stories about people who cannot set limits. I can tell you about my good friends who will remain nameless, who went back east last October to see the Colors in New England. We're supposed to have a wonderful, relaxing weekend doing the bed and breakfast in circuit. They get back stressed out to the max because they had spent a very tension-filled week. Because the couple that they were traveling with, actually it was the man of the couple that they were traveling with, was a very aggressive, dominating decision maker. So they spent the whole week being bamboozled into rushing around at too fast a pace, staying at inns they didn't like that much, and having zero time alone together as a couple. And neither one of them ever said anything about it. And these are not shy or retarded people. These are executives. These are very assertive people in many ways in their own life. But they didn't want to conflict. They didn't want to upset the whole thing, so they said nothing. They suffered silently. And it wasn't because they weren't able to set limits. It was because they weren't willing to set them, really. Which brings us to point number one, which is that not telling the truth does not work. And setting limits is all about truth-telling. It doesn't work for a variety of reasons. It doesn't work because, for one thing, you'd end up putting up with a whole lot of what you don't like and what you don't want, whether it's rushing around at a crazy pace or hearing about your coworker's sex life. It doesn't work because not only do you put up with a lot of what you don't like, you don't get what you do want, whether it's time alone or an unhurried week. It also doesn't work because when you don't tell the truth, problems repeat themselves. And so instead of getting one day of staying at an inn you don't like, you get a whole week's worth. People are not mind readers, most people anyway. And silence does imply consent. And you do teach people how you want to be treated. It also doesn't work not telling the truth because what happens is you end up suffering emotional and physical stress. Not telling the truth is hard on you physically, it's hard on your body, and it's certainly hard on you emotionally. And the last reason why it doesn't work is because it's very hard not telling the truth is on your relationships. I'm going on a very special trip. I'm going to go to Nepal, trekking in the Himalayas with my older son. It's a graduation present to him. It's a very exciting trip. I'm both thrilled about it and scared, actually, too. So I was telling a friend, a rather new friend, a woman that works with me at Career Track, I was telling her about the trek and on the phone, and in the middle of the conversation, she says to me, wouldn't it be great? She says, I think I could actually, I have vacation time. I could get the time off. Wouldn't it be great if I could join you there? Well, what do you say? It was an awkward moment. What do you think? No, it wouldn't be great? Or I'm not sure if it would be great, because that's really what it was. I hadn't even thought about it. So, of course, I say, oh, yeah, that'd be great. And I'm thinking, would it be so great? I don't know. So I get off the phone and I think about it. And I think to myself, it wouldn't be so great. And it was weird because I thought, what am I going to do about this? I actually considered telling her a lie. I did. I actually considered telling her that the group had filled up, the trekking group, which would have been a complete lie. There was no limit to the number of people, and we were a small group to start with. And I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I couldn't do it for a very good reason, because the minute I would do that with her, something very dramatic would happen in my relationship with her. It would distance me enormously. I would feel tense. I would feel uncomfortable when I talked to her. I would not want to go near her, because I'd be sitting around worried if she was going to come up and say to me, well, gee, is there a waiting list for the group, have things cleared up? I'd feel horrible. So I knew I had to tell her the truth. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, she's going to take it as a big rejection if I tell her I don't want her to come on the trip. How do you say that? It's an awkward communication to make. But actually, when I thought about it, I realized that it wasn't really even a rejection of her. It was much more an assertion of what I wanted, which was nothing to do with her, which had to do with my wanting time alone with myself and the mountains, and my wanting time alone with my son. And I knew that her joining us would change the dynamics of the trip a lot, and I didn't want that change. So that was easier to tell her. And so I actually had a pretty nice conversation with her about it, and telling the truth didn't mean I had to blurt everything out. You don't have to be indiscriminate about telling the truth. You have a perfect right to keep your opinions and your feelings to yourself. And I didn't have to tell her the bit about the personal part, which was that I didn't know her well enough to know if I wanted to go on a 6-week trekking trip with her. That's a lot. Traveling together for a week is a lot, but that kind of trip is very stressful. So I didn't even need to tell her. It wasn't necessary, so I didn't. I avoided that part. The point, though, that I want to make is that I have a one-liner. LSD produces 3D. Now, I know that's a little cryptic. And I'm not talking about the LSD of the 60s or the 3D of the 50s. You remember the 3D movies where you wore the You're telling your age, of course, when you say you remember those things. I'm talking about LSD, in this case meaning lying, suppressing, and denying. Lying, suppressing, and denying produce 3D: distance, deadening, and denial of what's so and what is possible. And it basically just does not work. Now here comes the good news. And this is the other side of point number one. Point number one here is not that not telling the truth doesn't work. The other side of that is telling the truth not only works, telling the truth is a turn-on. It's a positive turn-on. It enlivens your relationships, it clears the air, it lets you know where things stand, and it frees up a whole lot of energy, which is probably the reason why a lot of people have good sex after they have a fight. Because the truth has been told, finally. And it frees up energy in some wonderfully exciting ways. Here's point number two. Setting limits is a toughie. It's a real toughie. In truth-telling, the issue of limits strikes at some very deep chords within us. Chords that have to do with our integrity as an individual. Chords that have to do with our fears and our guilt. And chords that definitely have to do with our deep natural desire and need even for close, satisfying relationships with other people. So it's an important issue that is not easy to deal with. Point number three is that not only is setting limits a toughie, setting limits is a biggie. It's all pervasive. It is everywhere. It is in all situations at all times in your life. You cannot avoid the issue of limits in your life. It's there when you want conflicting things with somebody else. You want Chinese food, he wants a pizza. It's there when you don't get what you want. You don't get the credit that you want for the hard work that you did in the project. You don't get the consideration that you want from your man. It's there when you change your mind about something and you decide that it's no longer okay with you to pick up your coworker on the way to work whose car has been in the shop for 3 weeks now and was fine for the first few days, but now it's no longer okay. It's there when you disagree with somebody, you have a differing point of view. You think the job should be done this way, they think it should be done that way. It's there when you clash with another person's values, when you and your roommate have different standards on what constitutes neatness. A lot of people are having roommates. It's a whole other area of limit-setting relationships, for sure. It's there when you have to make mutual decisions with somebody, when you're in a project together with a colleague, or when you and a friend decide to go on a trip together and all of a sudden you face slews of decisions that affect you mutually. And it's there when you feel your rights have been violated. When your neighbor's son plays his drums at 3 a.m. Setting limits is everywhere. Because it's about boundaries, establishing boundaries in a world of nonstop relationship, because it's about the issue of separateness and togetherness and how you balance that in your life, setting limits issues tend to rear their little head in relationships where you work together, live together, play together, or even temporarily share time together and space together. For example, in the movie theater, somebody lights up behind you or cracks their gum in your ear, or in the supermarket and they cut in front of you in line. So it's basically all over the place. Point number 4, not only is setting limits a biggie and a toughie, it is a deepie, which is a word I just made up. Setting limits is a profound issue. It's not only broad-based, it is a deep issue. The philosophical implications of limit setting are nothing short of profound, because it's about the ultimate paradox. Einstein's universe, all the physics, the new age physics, the whole new age that we're in is about recognizing that it's not an either-or universe. It's not about being separate or being in relationship. It's about an and-or situation. One of the things that quantum mechanics and relativity have shown us is that, bottom line, the universe is not constituted of particles that are separate and have their own integrity only. That's part of the truth. But that is there alongside of the other truth, which is that the universe is both particle and wave. And the wave part is the relationship part, the connection part, the inseparable part, the cosmic web part, I guess you could call it. And that's what limits is about. It's saying, I have integrity as an individual, and I am different than you, and I also have tremendous connection with you. Common humanity as well as combined interests, shared needs. that kind of thing. In bringing home just how profound the issues are of setting limits, I want to use the help of a couple of beautiful writers. The first one is Robert Johnson, and this is from his book, We. Have you read the book, He and She? He's a Jungian analyst. He's also a very nice writer. And We is his book on the psychology of romantic love. And this is a quote from that book. "There is an awesome potential at stake in our evolution right now. It is the potential for being fully individual while also relating genuinely to another human being. The test of true individuation is that it includes the capacity to relate to another person and to respect him or her as an individual. Our desperate need is to realize that we need both qualities in life. We need individuality, and we also need relationship to others. We can't have one at the expense of the other. No person can be fully individual unless he or she is fully related. And the capacity for genuine relatedness grows in proportion to becoming a complete individual. These two aspects of life are yoked together by a deep and ancient bond." Now, the other author that I want to read is just one of my favorites, D.H. Lawrence. And this comes from Stream of Desire. And I think it's a really exceptional description of the same profound state of togetherness versus separateness that Limits is all about. This comes from a wonderful book called Challenge of the Heart, and it's a collection by John Wellwood of fantastic writings on male-female relationships. I recommend it highly. "In every living thing, there is a desire for love, or for the relationship of unison with the rest of things. That a tree should desire to develop itself between the power of the sun and the opposite pull of the earth's center, and to balance itself between the four winds of heaven, and to unfold itself between the rain and the shine, to have roots and feelers in blue heaven and innermost earth both. This is a manifestation of love, a knitting together of the diverse cosmos into a oneness, a tree. At the same time, the tree must most powerfully exert itself and defend itself to maintain its own integrity against the rest of things, so that love as a desire is balanced against the opposite desire to maintain the integrity of the individual self. Hate is not the opposite of love. The real opposite of love is individuality." Interesting way to look at it. Setting limits is about saying no to people and making that boundary up there. It's about saying yes but, or yes and, or yes if, without walling off, without closing down your heart, without losing your flexibility. So it is a deepie, it's a profound issue. Point number 5 is that setting limits is not only a profound issue, it's an emotional issue, very emotional issue. Telling the truth can be quite scary. It involves risk. To tell the truth, you've got to be willing to face a couple of big bears. Potential criticism, rejection, conflict, or loss. Not easy. And besides being scary, setting limits also provokes a couple of other emotions on a routine basis: guilt and disappointment and anger. To be able to set limits, you've got to be willing to deal with unpleasant experiences. You've got to be willing to have that be there as a possibility and not run from it. For Russ to set limits with his mother, he had to be willing to face her excommunication. She has money, I gather. So that means she would sign him out of the will or something. My friends, to set limits with these people they were traveling with, they might have had a fight. They might have even ruined the trip. There was a risk there, for sure. It's a very emotional issue. Here comes another story. Now, this one happened about a month ago, summer solstice time. Did you know that last month, summer solstice coincided with the full moon and the double moon in Capricorn, or something like that? I'm not that into astrology, but it definitely was a big deal event in the heavens. And I love full moons, and I love summer solstice, so I wanted that, it was a Saturday night, I wanted it to be a very special night. So I made plans quite a while before the Saturday with a friend, Noel, a male buddy of mine, to go to Half Moon Bay, and we were going to be out with some friends of his on the ocean, which I thought was perfect, under the moon, and maybe even do a bonfire or something ritualistic to celebrate summer solstice. And I told him how important it was to me this evening and making it just perfect. 5 o'clock on Saturday, I get a phone call from Noel, and he launches into this big, long story, which bottom line ends up with him saying he's going to cancel on me. And it was a lame excuse, in my opinion, to boot. Well, I was very annoyed. That's the polite way to say it. And I told him so. I said, I don't like this one bit. I said, you knew how important this was to me, and it feels to me like you could solve this problem in another way. He had a long story about a loan with some guy, and it was the only time you could see him, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, I don't care. I don't feel good about this at all. It leaves me in the lurch. I could have made other plans. There were other things I turned down. 5 o'clock here. You didn't know earlier? Well, he said, I was hoping you'd be understanding. And I thought, give me a break. Don't do the guilt number on me. And I said, well, that'd be nice if I had been understanding, but I'm not. And that's not where I'm at. It would be a lie to tell you that I feel like everything is just fine. It would be a total lie. And so there was this tense silence, and he said, well, I just have to do this. And I said, all right, fine. And I got off the phone. And I thought about my options at that point. And a friend of mine had called me earlier, and she had wanted me to go with her to this play that was in Berkeley. So I called her back, and I found out more information about it. And it wasn't what I really wanted to do. I didn't want to be inside. But I talked to her about maybe going out in the Berkeley Marina afterwards. And so I thought, okay, it will work, I guess. So I said, all right, I'll do it. Half an hour later, I get an invitation from my dear, dear friend Carolyn in the city to come over to the city to have dinner with her and her boyfriend Nick, who are making this 10-course Indonesian dinner. And they're going to meet the psychic group on Ocean Beach to have a bonfire for the full moon, right? So I'm thinking, oh, I don't believe this. This is so perfect. And I just get this thing set up with Patrice. So I told her, she said, well, you could break it with Patrice. You just set it up. I said, that's true, I could. So I got off the phone, I thought about it, and I thought, I really need to do that. I really want to be in the city. I know I would be resentful if I don't do this. And I think I had told Patrice what I really wanted for the evening, so I knew she knew. So with a little trepidation, I called Patrice. I was lucky. I got her answering machine. It's one of those few times you're happy to get somebody's answering machine. Oh, I thought, great. So I left my message, and as it turned out, I didn't talk to her the next day, and she was fine about it. And I went and had a wonderful, wonderful time. It was a great evening. But the point is that there were oodles of emotions going on all around this whole limit-setting situation. Noel set limits with me. Okay, when he said no to me, and he was going to cancel out. And obviously, he faced a lot of big bears there, with rejection and anger and all the stuff that he could stir up. I set limits and faced a lot of bears, too, when I expressed my feelings to him, that I didn't like it. That was limit-setting, too. And it was... It might have been easier to just play nicey-nicey and make believe it was okay. He faced limits with me again when he stood his ground, and he didn't give in to my anger and my disappointment. And of course, I faced limits setting and some emotions with Patrice when I canceled out on her. So there were just, anytime you set limits, you certainly stir up emotions within you usually. And on the receiving end too, obviously. There are a lot of emotions. It's an emotional issue. There's just no doubt about it. Besides illustrating the emotionality of limits, this little story on the summer solstice also illustrates another point about limits, and that is point number 6. Setting limits is about rights and responsibilities. Now, in this whole interaction, Noel had a right to decide that he was going to go talk to this guy about the loan, even if I didn't like it. Even if I could get 100 people to agree with me that it was a rude, inconsiderate thing for him to do. He has a right to do it. That's the bottom line. He does. You have a right to ask for what you want, even if it's completely unreasonable, and even go for it, within a certain limit. I had a right to express my feelings to him. Absolutely, I have a right, whether he likes it or not. Perfect right. I had a right to change my mind and cancel with Patrice and to create the evening just the way I wanted it to be. That was my right, absolutely. Now, there's responsibility here, though, too. And see, that's the relationship side of the coin. I have rights as an individual, and of course you have the same rights. The responsibility part is the function of our connection and the fact that no man and no woman is an island in this world. And what I do affects other people, and I better consider that and be responsible for it. So in setting limits, for example, with Noel, when I express my feelings, I have a responsibility to express my feelings appropriately. To express them abusively, I don't have a right to do. And in making my decision to cancel out on Patrice, I had a responsibility to consider her in the process because she was involved in this whole thing. And there were a number of things to consider. The fact that I hadn't made the plans weeks before, the fact that this wasn't a catered sit-down birthday dinner for her or something that I was pulling out on. All of that helped me in my decision on it. And ultimately, very important here is the responsibility that I was expressing, the responsibility to teach people how you want to be treated. For example, with Noel, my expressing my feelings was me being responsible for letting him know it's not okay with me. I don't like it when a friend does that, when they cancel on something that's really important, and I've told them it's really important at the last minute. I don't like it, unless it's a real emergency. And I need to tell people that. I need to tell him that. Otherwise, silence does imply consent, and it's going to happen again. And don't be surprised when it does. I could go on and on about rights and responsibility in this situation, but the point is made already, and that is that setting limits is intimately connected with expressing and standing up for your rights, and also expressing and claiming your responsibility.
This is the end of Cassette 1, Side A. Please fast forward to the end and listen to the other side as How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No continues. This is Tape 1, Side B of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
Here comes point number 7. Limits, like everything else, are relative matters. Okay? They vary dramatically depending on all kinds of things. Einstein's universe again, everything is relative. Everything is relative. Everything is point of view. They vary dramatically depending on the situation. Limits change over situation. For example, right now I'm writing a book. Well, my limits about socializing have very much changed. And I am real picky and real discriminating about what I do with my time. And so I'm setting limits and saying no in a lot of situations where I would have said yes before. Limits vary dramatically over time, too. They depend on timing and time. Whether you've had your cup of coffee yet in the morning, your limits will vary. What you're willing to put up with before and after. Whether you are willing to pick up your friend on the way to work. 2 days, fine. 3 weeks, not fine. Limits vary depending on who else you're dealing with. What you're willing to accept from somebody else's kid, you will not stand for from your own. Limits also are relative to individuals. They're like fingerprints. They're unique to you. Your limits are totally different than anybody else's. What you're willing or even delighted and fine with, you wouldn't go near, and vice versa. Absolutely. Let me take a straw vote here. How many of you, for example, have a problem with drop-in company? Somebody drops in on you and they don't call first. Raise your hand if that's a problem for you. Put your hand straight up so we can see. Okay, good. How many of you have no problem with that if somebody drops by your house and they don't call first? No problem at all. Okay, good. How many of you have a problem with gum cracking? Somebody cracking their gum in your ear. Me, I can have a nervous breakdown over it. It drives me crazy. It really does. I pop with the gum. I go like this with the gum. How many of you have no problem with gum cracking? Okay, good. How many of you have a double standard? It's fine if you do it, but not great if somebody else does it. Right? That's me, actually. I love to pop it. It took me years to learn how. My sister used to teach me how. She taught me how to snap my fingers and how to pop my gum. Point number 8. Because limits are relative matters, they are changeable matters. It's all up to you. This is an arbitrary situation we're talking about here. You determine your limits, which means that you can decide that you want to give in when it's appropriate to do so. And giving in is a very big part of assertiveness. Doing it somebody else's way. going for pizza instead of Chinese food because it doesn't matter that much to you, or because you've gotten your way a number of times in the recent past. You can also decide it's up to you to decide that something is non-negotiable, that this is a flat-out position that you're not willing to budge from, this limit. And some things in life are non-negotiable. Physical abuse, for example. In your life, you might say, no way. You lay a hand on me, buddy, and I'm out. And it's very important in life to know what you're willing to go to the wall for and where you do draw that line and say, not with me. And to let that be known. You can also decide, because it's all up to you, whether you want to do nothing about a situation, even though it might be a trespass of your limits. Because you just want to, maybe as an experiment, to see what will happen if you do nothing. Maybe because you're a very proactive person and you want to see what happens when you kick back and you don't set limits so often. So it's all up to you, absolutely. Point number 9. Limits and your intuition are a team, and they're a great team. And the trick is to put your intuition, your feminine intuitive, in the driver's seat. And let it lead you and guide you and tell you where to go and where to stop. And then what you do is you back up your intuitive knowing about where and how you want to go. You back it up with your yang, your masculine energy. That's a brand of assertion where your heart leads and you follow with your words, your actions, and your mind. They serve your intuition. It's a very winning team. That inner guidance can let you know what the answer is. I had a situation where not too long ago, I fast walk for my exercising, and I'm increasing it to get in shape for Nepal, of course. And I was going to meet a friend, and we were going to walk around the park and have a chance to visit while we walked. So I get there, and she's there with her boyfriend, Craig, which was fine. I like him too, and we all say hello, and we start out walking around. And Craig and I are talking, and all of a sudden I look back, Margot's gone. She's disappeared totally. And we kind of wait for her, and she doesn't show up. And she just never showed up. She just disappeared. I said, that's weird. Oh, no, he said, Margot follows her inner guidance. Well, I thought, whew, not very nice of her. I mean, she could have told us that her inner guidance had told her to go some other direction, because I had no idea what had happened to her. And it got me thinking about that whole thing, about how obviously there are ways and ways to follow your inner guidance. And if you've made, for example, plans with somebody to do something for weeks ahead, and then you get to Saturday and your inner guidance tells you to go sit in the mountain, and you've got lunch plans with this person, to me anyway, it behooves you to check out with the person, well, how important is this to you? Well, how would you feel if I back out and go to the mountain? And obviously a part of the formula, too, is to say, well, how strongly is my inner guidance pulling me there? I mean, is this really something I know I've got to do, or is it more of an iffy deal where I can go tomorrow night or later on today? But basically, you want to look here and then follow it with your energy that's yang, masculine. My last point, point number 10, is that setting limits is especially tricky for women. It's a very tough issue for women, the issue of boundaries, for a number of reasons. For one thing, I believe anyway that women have a natural bent toward relationship and toward wanting to be in connection with people. There have been 2 very interesting books written on this whole notion. The first was, I think it was the first anyway, published, Carol Gilligam's book called In a Different Voice. Carol Gilligan was named Woman of the Year by Ms. Magazine in '85. She's a professor at Yale University. She did a lot of research on how morality differs between men and women. And one of the conclusions she came to, and what she talks about in her book, is that there's no disputing that men and women differ in one very important way. As women, we are born out of a woman's body, and we are almost always raised by women. And our primary sense of ourselves as a woman comes about as a function of I'm the same as you, I'm connected to you, I'm in relationship to you. Men, on the other hand, of course, are born male out of a female body, and they are raised by women. And their sense of themselves as a man has got to come about as separation. I'm different than you. I am separate from you. And that results in 2 different states of being with men and women. That as women, we are, bottom line, because of all of that, more comfortable with intimacy and connection and relationship, and more threatened by autonomy and being separate, alone. And that in general, of course there are exceptions, in general, men are more comfortable with separateness and autonomy and more distressed and threatened by intimacy and relationship. And of course the other book that talked about this whole difference between male and female is Intimate Strangers, Lillian Rubin's excellent book. More popular version of the Carol Gilligan's book is a scholarly book. It's not that fun to read, but Lillian Rubin's book is wonderful if you haven't read it. In addition to this biological reality, this indisputable difference, another reason why women have such a hard time with boundaries, I think, is that as women we are raised to be people pleasers. We are raised to put what other people want first. We are raised to oftentimes devalue ourselves, and consequently a lot of women have low self-esteem and very low tolerance for the bearers of rejection and criticism. Can't stand it. We cannot stand it when somebody else doesn't like us and when they say no to us. And so that keeps us from setting a lot of appropriate limits and giving ourselves away. It creates us giving ourselves away in relationships. A lot of women lose themselves when they get into a relationship with a man, especially. But in relationships in general, but especially with a man. How many of you have read Robin Norwood's book, Women Who Love Too Much? Ah, ha, ha, ha. How many of you saw your little self walking across the pages? Ah, ha, ha, ha. Women rush in, they rescue men, they do it for them, they fail to set limits, they fail to be self-respecting, and they give themselves away and violate their own limits a lot. I read a very sad book, the Joan Kennedy story, recently. Whew, what a story of not being able to set limits and of being just run all over by not only Ted, but of course the whole Kennedy clan. She was nobody. She had no identity at all. And there are many stories like that of women who find themselves and come out of that finally. Good news. The last reason that as women we have trouble setting limits is motherhood, in my opinion. For those of us who have experienced motherhood, you experience a situation where you are in incredibly close contact, relationship with another human being who is virtually completely dependent upon you. And consequently, the issue of boundaries is a real tough one to establish. And a lot of women as mothers never do it. They get run all over by their kids, and they lose themselves. My neighbor has 2 little kids under 3, and I had a brief talk with her outside the other day. I was watering, and it was very sad. She was saying, I don't even know who I am anymore. All I do is, the usual, if you're a mother. She'd gone bye-bye somehow in the process. So that, I think, also sets us up. Do your kids a favor. Do them a big favor. Model setting limits. It's one of the nicest lessons you can teach them. Kids need to learn to set limits very, very much so. And I was up in Alaska doing a program in Anchorage, and there was a radio show. There was a child abuse program where they were teaching young children how to say no and set limits with strangers. Boy, do they need to learn that. They don't know it. And to do it in a way that's not paranoid. That's not out of fear, but that's out of appropriateness, where they have some limits about their body and about who and how they're treated by other people. I also saw a UPI story in the paper the other day about a sex education program back in Baltimore. And they were saying one of the outcomes, a fear had been, well, we teach these kids sex education, they're going to get promiscuous. Actually, the outcome was that the young women, the girls in the program, had sex less often and stayed virgins longer because they had learned it's okay to say no, and they had learned some skills about how to say no in a way that didn't totally alienate them from all the boys that they were seeing. So do your kids a big favor and model how to be self-respecting and set limits for yourself in your own life. I hope that I've said enough to make you think about limits in your own life and your own relationships, and to, for sure, make it a priority in what you do with yourself and your own self-development work. To wind up, I want to share one more excerpt from a book with you, and it's an exquisite example of how to set limits with grace and dignity. It's made a big impact on me. I heard Ram Dass read it. It's from his book, How Can I Help? It's not necessarily something that most of us will relate to in terms of how we set limits, but I think it's a beautiful vision and model of how limits can be set. Because the fact of the matter is that this issue of limits is more important than ever today. In our overstimulated, overcrowded, unbelievably fast-changing world, it is very critical that as individuals we learn to respect and conserve our energy and our time, And at the same time that as individuals, we also learn to live in harmony with other people who are different from us. This is a true story that Ram Dass actually experienced. The train clanked and rattled through the suburbs of Tokyo on a drowsy spring afternoon. Our car was comparatively empty. A few housewives with their kids in tow, some old folks going shopping. I gazed absently at the drab houses and dusty hedgerows. At one station, the doors opened, and suddenly the afternoon quiet was shattered by a man bellowing violent, incomprehensible curses. The man staggered into our car. He wore laborer's clothing, and he was big, drunk, and dirty. Screaming, he swung at a woman holding a baby. The blow sent her spinning into the laps of an elderly couple. It was a miracle that the baby was unharmed. Terrified, the couple jumped up and scrambled toward the other end of the car. The laborer aimed a kick at the retreating back of the old woman, but missed as she scuttled to safety. This so enraged the drunk that he grabbed the metal pole in the center of the car and tried to wrench it out of its stanchion. I could see that one of his hands was cut and bleeding. The train lurched ahead, the passengers frozen with fear. I stood up. I was young then, some 20 years ago, and in pretty good shape. I'd been putting in a solid 8 hours of Aikido training nearly every day for the past 3 years. I liked to throw and grapple. I thought I was tough. The trouble was, my martial skill was untested in actual combat. As students of Aikido, we were not allowed to fight. Aikido, my teacher had said again and again, is the art of reconciliation. Whoever has the mind to fight has broken his connection with the universe. If you try to dominate people, you are already defeated. We study how to resolve conflict, not how to start it. I listened to his words. I tried hard. I even went so far as to cross the street to avoid the chimpira, the pinball punks who lounged around the train stations. My forbearance exalted me. I felt both tough and holy. In my heart, however, I wanted an absolute legitimate opportunity whereby I might save the innocent by destroying the guilty. This is it, I said to myself as I got to my feet. People are in danger. If I don't do something fast, somebody will probably get hurt. Seeing me stand up, the drunk recognized a chance to focus his rage. Aha, he roared, a foreigner! You need a lesson in Japanese manners. I held on tightly to the commuter strap overhead and gave him a slow look of disgust and dismissal. I planned to take this turkey apart, but he had to make the first move. I wanted him mad, so I pursed my lips and blew him an insolent kiss. All right, he hollered, you're going to get a lesson. He gathered himself for a rush at me. A fraction of a second before he could move, someone shouted, hey! It was ear-splitting. I remember the strangely joyous, lilting quality of it, as though you and a friend had been searching diligently for something and he had suddenly stumbled upon it. Hey! I wheeled to my left. The drunk spun to his right. We both stared down at a little Japanese man. He must have been well into his 70s, this tiny gentleman, sitting there immaculate in his kimono. He took no notice of me, but beamed delightedly at the laborer as though he had a most important, most welcome secret to share. Come here, the old man said in an easy vernacular, beckoning to the drunk. Come here and talk with me. He waved his hand lightly. The big man followed as if on a string. He planted his feet belligerently in front of the old gentleman and roared above the clacking wheels, why the hell should I talk to you? The drunk now had his back to me. If his elbow moved so much as a millimeter, I'd drop him in his socks. The old man continued to beam at the laborer. What you been drinking? He asked, his eyes sparkling with interest. I've been drinking sake, the laborer bellowed back. It's none of your business. Flecks of spittle spattered the old man. Oh, that's wonderful, the old man said. Absolutely wonderful. You see, I love sake too. Every night, me and my old wife, she's 76, you know, we warm up a little bottle of sake and we take it out into the garden and we sit in an old wooden bench. We watch the sun go down and we look to see how our persimmon tree is doing. My great-grandfather planted that tree and we worry about whether it will recover from those ice storms we had last winter. Our tree has done better than I expected, though, especially when you consider the poor quality of the soil. It's gratifying to watch when we take our sake and go out to enjoy the evening, even when it rains. He looked up at the laborer, eyes twinkling. As he struggled to follow the old man's conversation, the drunk's face began to soften. His fists slowly unclenched. Yeah, he said. I love persimmons too. His voice trailed off. Yes, said the old man, smiling, and I'm sure you have a wonderful wife. "No," replied the laborer. "My wife died." Very gently, swaying with the motion of the train, the big man began to sob. "I don't got no wife. I don't got no home. I don't got no job. I'm so ashamed of myself." Tears rolled down his cheeks. A spasm of despair rippled through his body. Now it was my turn. Standing there in my well-scrubbed, youthful innocence, my make-this-world-safe-for democracy righteousness, I suddenly felt dirtier than him. Then the train arrived at my stop. As the doors opened, I heard the old man cluck sympathetically. My, he said. "That's a difficult predicament." "Indeed, sit down here and tell me about it." I turned my head for one last look. The laborer was sprawled on the seat, his head in the old man's lap. The old man was softly stroking the filthy, matted hair. As the train pulled away, I sat down on a bench. What I had wanted to do with muscle had been accomplished with kind words. I had just seen Aikido tried in combat, and the essence of it was love. I would have to practice the art with an entirely different spirit. It would be a long time before I could speak about the resolution of conflict. Thank you very much.
This concludes the live portion of Maria's presentation on setting limits. Now listen to Tape 2, Side A, to learn the skills you need in order to speak up, set limits, and say no. This is Tape 2, Side A of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
This audio tape program is designed to offer you ways to have greatly increased clarity and comfort in one of the most important and fascinating areas of assertiveness, setting limits, letting others know how you want to be treated, where you draw the line, and what you want from them for yourself. Put it simplest, setting limits refers to letting others know what you want and don't want, what you're willing to do or put up with, and what you're not willing to do or put up with. The limits you set may be about your time, your energy, your money, your desire for privacy, or they may be about the kind of treatment and consideration that you want to get from others. Recently, I had an experience that brought home to me many of the issues that we have around setting limits diplomatically and successfully. I was returning home from a dinner with friends that I didn't know very well. The man who was driving had clearly had a lot to drink during the evening, and in my opinion was not in any shape to drive. But he was just as clearly planning to do just that. I had to think fast. Even though this was a new friendship, I didn't want to offend or alienate him. I didn't want to just speak out without first considering how to best say what I wanted to say. So I bought some time for myself by going to the bathroom. There I had a few minutes to look at my choices. I could do nothing and pray that there'd be no problem getting home safely. I could take a cab home, either making an excuse or telling the truth about why I was doing this. I could take the wife aside and speak with her about my feelings, suggesting that she drive home instead. Or I could talk with the other couple involved and get their cooperation. You know, in unity there is strength. I decided to talk privately to both the wife and the husband. I quickly rehearsed mentally the worst of all possible and the best of all possible scenarios. The first with him resisting and getting nasty in response to me. The second with him giving in easily to the idea of not driving. In both versions, I saw myself calmly, gently, in a low-key manner, saying something like this. I want to talk with you about the drive home. I'd like to suggest that Mary drive, seeing as John has had a number of drinks, just to be safe. I know I'd be much more comfortable with that. Since the big TV campaign about not letting your friends drive when they drink, I've just decided that it's an important issue to speak up on. Would that work for Mary to drive? As it turned out, despite my preparation for resistance, I didn't get any. Mary heartily agreed with my suggestion, and because nobody else was around, John seemed able to go along with it without losing face. It worked out fine, and I felt real proud of myself for taking a stand. Needless to say, we all did get home safely. You face limit-setting situations dozens of times a day, with people wanting more time and energy from you than you want to give, in situations where you're being treated in ways that you just find unacceptable. Limit setting is one of the most important ways in which you stand up for yourself and assert your rights. It reflects your sense of individuality within relationships. It calls for both firmness and flexibility, a sense of rights and a sense of responsibility. It's not only saying no, but it's sometimes saying yes but, or yes and, or yes if. Limit-setting situations pop up in every area of your life. While you're driving, when you're shopping or eating out, with your family and friends, and of course at the office. When you set limits, you teach people how you want to be treated. So this is no small issue we're talking about here. People who don't know how to set limits end up feeling used and abused. People who don't know how to set limits waste a lot of time and a lot of energy and destroy their peace of mind. People who don't know how to set limits end up with bruised relationships and hurt feelings. How many times has someone cut in front of you in line and you sat there silently fuming? How many times has someone spoken to you abruptly in a meeting, cut you off, or failed to acknowledge a contribution you made, and you stewed or fretted about it, talked about it to everybody but the other person involved? How frequently do you go along with things because it's easier to say yes and to be honest? How often do you overextend yourself, get yourself roped into obligations you don't have time or interest for? How many times do you wait too long before opening up your mouth, and then when you do finally say something, you say it abruptly, and end up with bad feelings or a bigger problem? You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your relationships, and you owe it to your health to learn how to set limits diplomatically and successfully. And this is just what you'll be learning with this tape program. I heard a radio broadcast a few days ago that described a special program aimed at reducing child abuse. The program instructs small children through role play and videotaping how to set limits with strangers, relatives, and friends. What a wonderful and important idea. Unfortunately, most of us were not taught how to set limits as children. We were not shown how, either. We rarely had models to watch and learn from. Those around us, our family, friends, our teachers, were usually clumsy and uncomfortable in this area of assertion. If we were lucky, we might have had one or two adults in our childhood who stood up for themselves, demonstrated self-respect, and spoke their mind with grace and assurance. In my own childhood, no one fit this bill. So I spent my 20s setting limits quite aggressively, and my 30s learning how to do it more assertively instead. Listen to this Dear Abby letter that conveys in a nutshell what's in store for you when you're reluctant to set limits. Dear Abby, one of the women I work with is constantly talking about her sex life with her husband. She's not a young kid either. Some of us are bored, others are embarrassed by her daily reports of what went on in her bedroom, but no one has the nerve to tell her. What should we do? And it was signed The Office Gang. Abby wrote back, Dear Gang, if no one has the courage to speak up, you all deserve to be bored and embarrassed. Your letter is a reminder that the meek are destined to put up with a lot. It's true. Not setting limits, not saying what you want or don't want or how you feel means putting up with a lot. Because other people are not mind readers, and because we don't have unlimited time and energy, limit setting is an ongoing, inescapable part of life. Setting limits has deep and broad-ranging implications. In many ways, it is the cornerstone of time and stress management. It also has a great deal to do with the results you achieve, how much you accomplish in life. Setting limits represents the art of maintaining your individuality within the context of relationships. A lot of people fear intimacy and commitment in relationships because they're afraid of getting swallowed up, losing themselves in the relationship. And this can happen when you're unable to set limits and give in too much, give up too much of yourself. Assertiveness has sometimes been confused with self-absorption and selfishness. Actually, assertiveness is the fine art of being respectful, fair, and considerate to yourself as well as to others. Unfortunately, after years of stuffing feelings and acting like a victim, some people go to extremes. They read an assertiveness book, and the next thing you know, they're impossible to live with, speaking up over every little thing, making a fuss over situations that are really better ignored. Setting limits is about being what's called benevolently self-interested. What you strive for is a healthy balance between selfishness and selflessness, between standing firm and giving in. As an assertive person, sometimes you put yourself first, respecting others in the process, and sometimes you put others first, yielding on your first choice. Being assertive does not always mean getting your way and having things as you want them. I'd like to start out by giving you a general overview of this learning program so you'll know what ground we're going to be covering together and have a sense of the entire journey. The side you're now listening to gives you an understanding of what we're dealing with, the broad and the deep implications of setting limits. I'll also be sharing with you on this side how we change. Change does not happen overnight. It takes place in steps. If you appreciate the progression of the change process, you'll be more patient with yourself along the way. You'll recognize signposts of change that people often overlook or fail to understand, and you'll keep at your improvement efforts rather than getting frustrated and giving up when you don't see immediate results. On this side, I'll also be giving you a few tips on how to most effectively use this audio learning tape program. You're going to receive reinforcement for your motivation to change your limit-setting style. This side will help you understand the price you're now paying for failing to set limits effectively and what you stand to gain by changing these patterns, kind of a cost-benefit analysis. You'll start the process of becoming more aware of your current pattern setting limits. Awareness always precedes change. You'll be identifying the who, the when, the where, and the how of your current problems. You'll explore the how come of your problems. What has stood in the way of your saying no honestly to others? There are a number of major obstacles that make it difficult to tell the truth. To change, it's essential that you understand what keeps you from being honestly assertive. Until you understand your fears and your confusions and your misconceptions, it's unlikely you'll do much changing. Occasionally, of course, fear or guilt in a situation can be legitimate. Occasionally, keeping your mouth shut is the appropriate thing to do. Faulty thinking, however, creates many emotional false alarms. These false emotional alarms are at the root of most non-assertive behavior. When you can tell the difference between unfounded fears and real jeopardy, you can then choose when and how to tell the truth with ease and success. You'll be learning proven techniques of successful limit setting. Specifically, you'll be shown ahead-of-time strategies to give yourself the clarity, the courage, and the confidence to tell others the truth. Frequently in life, limit setting takes place after the fact. That is, you may not have it all together at the scene of a problem on what to say or how to best say it. In touchy situations, or in situations with high jeopardy, you may want to think things over and take some time ahead of time to calm yourself down and determine your best strategy. I'll be describing many applications for each of the techniques, both at home and at work. I'll be sharing with you ideas on minimizing resistance and minimizing defensiveness in others, while maximizing getting positive, cooperative response at the same time. You'll find out what to do when you don't get the results you want, how to hang in there and continue to act assertively when others are not cooperative or responsive, how to stay calm, clear, confident, and positive during second round and third round assertion, and also how to let go with dignity when there's little or no hope for success. Set a schedule for yourself where you first listen to the entire tape series, 1 or 2 sides at a time to prevent data overload. This first time through, don't take any notes, don't do any of the assignments. Just relax, listen while you get a sense of the whole program. Then take each side by itself and have what I call a sit-down session, a time when you sit while listening, stopping the tape to make your notes or do assignments. Following these sit-down sessions, play each side at least 2 more times in a relaxed atmosphere, wherever that might be, at home, in your car, as you exercise. If you can, follow along glancing at your notes so that you reinforce your learning with visual input. With this over-learning, you'll end up embedding the information in your subconscious. That way it's going to be there when you need it. Another way to effectively integrate the material is to discuss it with a friend. Talk about it as well as listen to it. Encourage a friend to buy their own program and work along with you. Now that we've taken care of these preliminaries, let's begin our program by looking closely at the change process. To give you realistic expectations about your learning progress, I want to tell you about a clever way of understanding change. This model of change gives you a way to watch yourself move through the back and forth progression that leads to new habits. With this understanding, you'll hang in there and continue on the path despite what seem to be setbacks. Visualize this model of change as a staircase with 4 levels. At the first level, which I call pre-change, before you take any steps to change, you are unaware, unconsciously incompetent. That is, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're doing, and you don't know what the consequences of what you're doing are. After you take the first step to change, waking up, you're at the second level, where you are now self-aware. Now at least you know what you don't know. You see what you're doing, and you understand the consequences of your behavior. You will become consciously incompetent. After you take the second step to change, choosing change, you arrive at level 3, conscious competence. Here you try out a new skill or a new habit. Finally, once you take step 3 to change, acquiring a new habit, you become unconsciously competent. You begin to automatically and naturally exercise this new skill that you've been working at. You've moved through this 3-step progression to change many times in your life. Every time you improve in a sport, for example. In tennis, at first you have no idea what it takes to hit a backhand well. Then a teacher shows you how, and you wake up to a new awareness of how your backhand falls short of what will bring good results. At this stage of conscious incompetence, you become painfully aware of how your elbow sticks out and how your racket goes down instead of up. Slowly, you enter into conscious competence, an awkward period of stiffly doing it right. At this level, you have to monitor your movements constantly so that you don't lapse into your old way of hitting the ball. Finally, after lots of practice, as you establish a new behavioral track for yourself, you can let go and relax and automatically swing properly. You've reached unconscious competence. The first and most critical step to change is waking up, moving from the first level of unconscious incompetence to the second level of conscious incompetence. In order to change, you must always first wake up to how you are now doing something. You must first raise your consciousness and become self-aware. Without this waking up, you will never shift off of old habits. There are many ways to wake yourself up and become more self-aware. Audio programs, seminars, workshops, self-help books all offer ways where an expert shows you typical patterns of problems to help you become more familiar with your own dysfunction. Then, if during this workshop you learn that your limit-setting problems involves overextending yourself at work, during your conscious incompetence stage, you may still get yourself roped into obligations you don't want, but at least now you see what you're doing. Even if it's after the fact, you've become a witness to yourself and to this tendency to say yes when you really want to say no. Without this initial self-awareness, nothing will change. Conscious incompetence, this awareness stage, can be a very uncomfortable stage of development. There can be a lot of discomfort from your newfound self-consciousness. You may be hard on yourself, convinced you'll never change such a rampant habit. It can seem like ignorance was bliss, and you'd rather not be so aware of the ways in which you're flubbing it. But ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is no choice. Celebrate your awareness. Every time you catch yourself in your incompetence, recognize that you are making the most important of the steps to change. You are seeing what you're up to and how it doesn't work. This awareness alone can and does produce miracles. The second step toward change is deciding to do things differently, choosing change. To make this move to conscious competence, you need the motivation to take the time and energy that change requires. Therefore, it helps to fully appreciate what it's costing you not to change, as well as what's in it for you to change. Conscious competency can also be an uncomfortable stage of learning because you're doing new and different things. At first, you may not do them right, or they may feel strange and awkward to you. You also may not get such great results at first. Give yourself room at this stage for the natural learning curve to occur. It's like wearing new shoes. It takes a while before they adapt to who you are and stop hurting. Wear your new skill for a while and get the feel of it over time. During the conscious competence stage, it will be necessary to monitor yourself so that you don't slip back into old ways. You'll have to remind yourself to do it in the new way and watch yourself as you do it. You won't yet be ready to go on automatic pilot. This stage requires commitment and self-discipline. The third and final step toward change is acquiring a new habit and becoming unconsciously competent. Now you no longer have to tell yourself or watch yourself do things the new way. The skill or the attitude has become a natural automatic part of your repertoire. Change, of course, is a back and forth progression. So, situationally, you may lose it and revert to old habits. Recognize that this is going to happen every so often so that you accept these setbacks as normal. Otherwise, they can become demoralizing. Let's review. First, you become aware of what you're doing that's not working. You become consciously incompetent. Then, with proper motivation, you decide to change, and you become consciously competent. Finally, with self-discipline and time, you establish a new habit and become unconsciously competent. Hopefully, this gives you a better picture of the learning process and what to expect from yourself as you make changes in the way you set limits. Now it's time for you to begin waking up.
This is the end of Cassette 2, Side A. Please fast forward to the end and listen to the other side as How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No continues. This is Tape 2, Side B of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
Your first task in improving your ability to say no is to have clear sense of the powerful motives propelling you to change. This clarity of your own motivation will carry you far in helping you hang in there despite initial frustrations and disappointments in the learning process. This clear sense of personal motivation will remind you why you're taking the time and energy to do this when it's feeling tedious or time-consuming. So, first off, on this side, we'll explore some of the reasons why it's so important for you to become better at setting limits. We'll conduct a cost-benefit analysis of the situation. What the toll is if you continue doing it in the same old ineffective ways of the past. What the advantages are if you follow the guidelines and ideas you'll be learning from this program and do things differently. Hopefully, you're already motivated to change. That's why you're listening to this program. Understanding what it costs you to stay the same will help better maintain that commitment. Then your second task in changing is to conduct an extensive self-assessment. By freely admitting current disabilities, fears, habits, and the areas of limits, you'll begin the process of freeing yourself to handle situations differently. So, following our cost-benefit analysis, this side will give you the chance to self-evaluate your current patterns around setting limits. Who in your life do you have trouble saying no to? Your mother? Your in-laws? Your friends? Your boss? Your boss's secretary? When are you most uncomfortable and least effective setting limits? When you're overtired? When you're not feeling well? Before your morning coffee? You'll also be looking at what sorts of situations you have the most trouble with. Are you super sensitive to criticism? Do you react strongly when people yell at you? Finally, we'll look at how you now tend to handle problem situations. Do you say yes quickly to requests and then later regret what you've done and lie to get out of it? Do you tend to hold back when annoyed about inconsiderate behavior? Then when you finally do say something, say it abruptly. Let's start with Task 1, a cost-benefit look at the important reasons and motives for changing your limit-setting style. There are 6 compelling reasons that can strongly motivate and sustain your commitment to become assertive at setting limits. Reason 1, when you don't set limits, problems repeat themselves. Reason number 2, everyone's limits are unique, and people cannot read your mind. Reason number 3, limits change constantly. Number 4, when you don't set limits, you often manipulate to try to get your way. Reason number 5, when you don't set limits, you rarely do get your way. And finally, reason number 6, when you don't set limits, you damage relationships. Reason number 1, when you don't set limits, problems repeat themselves. The first compelling reason to improve your assertiveness is that when you fail to set limits or do so indirectly, problems do repeat themselves. You teach people how you want to be treated. Silence does imply consent. Dirty looks, long faces, and the other indirect forms of communication which you hope will give others a hint don't work. Or at least they rarely work. Usually they work against you because they give misleading messages and create misunderstandings and resentment. It is essential that you take responsibility for verbally letting people know when they're doing something that you have a problem with. A friend of mine, Paula, moved into a new apartment complex and was very distressed to find out after she moved in that her next-door neighbor was a hard rock fan who played his music at the threshold of pain late into the evening and early in the mornings. She had heard another resident of the building hollering at the guy with no luck. In fact, this only seemed to make him more angry and determined to play his music loud. Anyway, she wasn't the type to yell and scream. So she did what she usually ended up doing when she faced a problem of this sort. She put up with the noise, and she complained a lot to her friends. She did call her landlord once, with no results. Finally, she started giving the guy disgusted, dirty looks whenever she saw him in the elevator or in the laundry room, hoping he'd get the hint, which he never did. She put up with the racket for months, and finally moved out, rather than face direct confrontation. If you're waiting for people to get the hint, you may wait a long time. If you say nothing when a friend calls you past your bedtime and hope that your cool tone of voice is going to get it across that you were disturbed, don't be surprised when the friend calls again next week at the same time. When you give someone help and then privately stew over the imposition, don't blame anyone but yourself when they want more of the same help tomorrow. You teach people how you want to be treated, and silence does imply consent. Reason number 2, everyone's limits are unique, and people cannot read your mind. The second big reason to set limits assertively is that limits are like fingerprints, unique to each individual. So you can never assume that someone will know without you telling them that what they're doing is bothering you. Now, you may think that they should know. You may think that when someone is doing something obviously inconsiderate or rude, they should know without you having to tell them how thoughtless they're being. And you may resent the fact that you have to take the time and the trouble to ask for what's common decency in your book. The trouble with this attitude is that even when it's justified, even when you can get 1,000 people to agree with you that someone's behavior is obnoxious or inappropriate, it still remains your responsibility to act assertively if you're the one troubled by the behavior. For example, most people would agree that it's inappropriate to call someone in the middle of the night just to chat. Unfortunately, there always remains tremendous variation in the ways in which individuals interpret such social norms. And there's also endless variation in what people consider to be legitimate exceptions to such norms. Some people might think it's okay to call at 3 in the morning if their car breaks down and they need a ride, even if they have other options. Public belching may be disgusting to you, yet acceptable to somebody else who was brought up in a different subculture that approved of it or even admired it. Showing up at a friend's home without calling first might be to you the height of presumptuousness and inconsideration. To someone else, it's no big deal. A third person may welcome drop-in company, may think it's wonderful spontaneity, and therefore they think that they're being wonderfully spontaneous when they do it to you. You just never know. Others cannot read your mind, and you cannot read theirs. You must continually be willing to communicate verbally and directly where you draw the line. Reason number 3. Limits change constantly. Third reason to set limits assertively is that limits change constantly. Where I draw the line today may not be where I draw it tomorrow. Where I draw the line with Fred may be different from what I'll accept from George. What's okay with me from my kids in the privacy of my home may change dramatically when we're at a restaurant or visiting relatives. You may be fine picking up a coworker whose car is in the shop for a day or two, but unwilling to continue doing this if they need a ride longer than that. Limits, unlike fingerprints, are not stable. They are relative to many factors: who you're dealing with, the circumstances of the situation, time, your mood, your physical condition, just to name a few. This means, of course, that the communication around your limits is never done. It's an ongoing, ever-present part of your life and your relationships. Throughout your life, throughout your day, there will be many times you'll change your mind, change your feelings, change your threshold of tolerance, and this frequently needs to be communicated assertively to avoid conflict or upset. Reason number 4. When you don't set limits, you often manipulate to get your way. The fourth reason to become an assertive limit setter is that when you don't set limits, you often resort to passive aggression. You manipulate to take care of the problem. You try to get what you want indirectly. There are hundreds of ways you might do this. Maybe you try to flatter someone into treating you better. You tell them how thoughtful they are, hoping they'll become more thoughtful if you tell them this. Maybe you criticize instead of asking for what you want. You say, "You talk too much," instead of saying, "I'd like you to listen to me. I want my time to talk too." Maybe you manipulate by telling someone, "You deserve a nice night out," instead of telling the truth, which is, "I want to go out tonight. I don't feel like cooking." Or maybe you play martyr, whining, "All right, fine, we'll do it your way," knowing it's anything but fine. Reason number 5 for changing. When you don't set limits, you rarely do get your way. Call it martyrdom or stupidity. As Abby told us, the bottom line is the meek are destined to put up with a lot. When you don't set limits, you end up doing a lot of things you don't want to do, and you end up not doing a lot of things you do want to do. You go to movies you don't really want to see because you want to avoid an argument. You go out for the evening when you'd rather be home watching TV because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. You take on responsibilities when you're already overloaded because you're afraid others will think less of you or punish you if you say no. You lend friends money when you don't want to because you think if you tell the truth, you'll be letting them down or won't be a good friend. You fail to take the time alone you crave on the weekend because you're afraid your partner is going to take it as an insult. Without the willingness and the ability to set limits effectively, your life ends up being a lie. You live it by doing and not doing according to what you imagine other people want or don't want. You give away your power to choreograph your life the way you want it to be. Reason number 6. When you don't set limits, you damage relationships. The final and 6th reason to change is that the failure to set limits severely damages your relationships. Resentments build up inside of you when you continually self-sacrifice, and one way or another, this shows. You end up feeling mistreated, unrespected, taken advantage of, and this shows. You end up judging people privately as inconsiderate or rude, and this shows. Failure to set limits is unhealthy for you, and it's unhealthy for your relationships. Let's review the 6 reasons why it's so important to take the time and the effort to set limits assertively. 1. When you don't set limits, problems repeat themselves. 2. Everyone's limits are unique, and people cannot read your mind. 3. Limits change constantly. 4. When you don't set limits, you often resort to manipulation to get your way. 5. When you don't set limits, you rarely get your way. And 6. When you don't set limits, you damage relationships. I'd like to now turn your attention to a self-assessment of your current habits and patterns in limit-setting situations so that you can take that first critical step, waking up to conscious incompetence. Let's look together at your life and do some analysis, some compartmentalizing in terms of the who, the people you deal with, the what and the when, the kinds of situations that are most problematical for you, and the how, your current tendencies in handling these problems. Please get out a pencil and paper so you can do this analysis now. If this is your first time hearing the program, don't worry about making the list at this time. Just continue to listen and do the assignments next time you hear this side. First, I'd like you to create some who lists. Lists of the people you interact with on a regular basis in your everyday life. You're going to make 3 separate lists. 1, a personal world list. 2, a work world list. And 3, a world at large list. Use a separate sheet of paper for each. All 3 lists will include both categories and individual names of people under the categories. List number 1, your personal world list. This list should include, when appropriate for your situation, the following categories. Immediate family. This will include your spouse or significant other as well as your children. Relatives. This includes your parents, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, etc. Roommates, if you have them. Friends. Neighbors. And acquaintances. For example, people you know at church or at your tennis club. Also include the general categories of men, women, older people, and younger people. Under each category, list individual names. Some names will be listed under more than one category. Turn off your recorder and create this list now. List number 2, your work world list. This list should include these categories: people you manage, authority figures, for example, your boss, his or her boss, as well as other executives of your company, support staff, colleagues, both inside and outside of your company, clients or customers, and vendors. Add the general categories of men, women, older and younger people. And finally, list individual names under each category. Turn off the recorder and create this list now. List number 3, your world at large list, includes these categories: salespeople, waiters and waitresses, other drivers on the road, physicians, accountants, lawyers, service people, other customers in stores, strangers, for example, people you might interact with on the street, in a bar, or on a plane. And then there are the general categories of men, women, older people, and younger people. List appropriate individual names under each category. Also list specific subcategories when you can. If you travel a lot, for example, under salespeople, include ticket agents, rent-a-car agents, hotel registration clerks. Under service people, include car repairmen, household help, babysitters, etc. Once again, turn off your recorder and complete this 3rd list. Now, take a moment to code all 3 of your lists as follows. First, circle the names of those individuals and those categories that seem to give you the most trouble setting limits. Please do this now. Next, put an asterisk next to any circled individuals or categories that you consider to be especially important to you in your life. These are the limit-setting challenges that you really want to do something about. Finally, take a long look at what your who lists reveal. Is there a pattern? Do you mostly have trouble at work or at home or out in the world dealing with strangers? Is it primarily with your immediate family or remote acquaintances or service people? Or are your problems more widespread? Now you're going to be creating your when lists. Set aside your who list for now and use several sheets of fresh paper. Title these your when lists. On your when list sheets, list time categories and subcategories as appropriate for your lifestyle. For example, under the category of morning, you might list such subcategories as before breakfast, bathroom get-ready time, getting kids ready for school, breakfast, commuting, start up at work, morning staff meeting, and morning break. Go through your entire day in this fashion, analyzing as much as possible your routine in an afternoon category and an evening category. Make a separate category for the weekend with such subcategories as Saturday home chores, grocery shopping, chauffeuring kids to lessons, etc. Please turn off the recorder and create this when list now. Now code this when list by circling those times when you believe you are most vulnerable to being short-tempered, ill at ease, or impatient. Next, put an asterisk next to the times when you experience most of your limit-setting problems. Do you have a lot of upset early mornings, hurting your kids to get dressed and off to school? Do you experience a lot of tension at staff meetings? Are you unhappy with how your weekends go? Your what lists. Now using new paper, create a what list. This time, you're going to analyze the sorts of situations that trigger you, the sorts of situations that you usually do not handle successfully. As you did with your who list, create 3 separate lists, one each for your personal world, your work world, and your world at large. Under each of these, create a heading dealing with abusive, unfair, upsetting, or inconsiderate behavior. Under this heading, list these subcategories: interruptions, being ignored, being yelled at, rudeness on the phone, lateness, abusive criticism, feeling pressured, sexual harassment or chauvinism, expressing anger, expressing hurt, expressing disagreement, dealing with rejection, and finally, office visiting and socializing. Now, under each of the lists, your personal, work world, and world at large lists, create a second heading, asking for what I want. Under this heading, put these subcategories: asking for help or favors, asking for more time, asking for information, asking for privacy, asking for confidentiality, sharing responsibilities, delegating work, giving critical feedback, giving directions to others, turning down work or increased responsibility, turning down requests for help or favors, negotiating a raise or promotion, returning unsatisfactory food or merchandise, and finally, asking for refunds. Add any other generic situations that you face on a regular basis and have problems with. Code your when lists in the same way you coded your who lists. First, circling the times that are trouble spots for you, setting limits. Then putting an asterisk beside any circled times that are critical to you. In appreciating how you currently tend to deal with difficult or upsetting situations, remember there are 2 basic patterns other than assertion that you want to watch for: fight or aggression, and flight or non-assertion. When you take flight and act non-assertively, you tend to be defensive or self-protective. You say or do nothing. You try to ignore the situation, stuff your feelings, or deal with things indirectly or manipulatively. When you fight or act aggressively, you lose your temper. You deal with problems abruptly, curtly, combatively. You force or dominate to get your way. Now, it's important to understand that both fight and flight are defensive. They are both self-protection. For this final part of your self-assessment, review your who, when, and what lists. Look them all over. Notice your circled entries, those individuals, situations, and times where you seem to have the most problems setting limits. Now on a new sheet, create your how list with 3 headings: fight, flight, and manipulate. Under each heading, write any combinations that fit for you. Sort of like the old Clue game, Mrs. Plum with the pipe wrench in the library. Only here, you might write under fight, with the kids in the morning when they take too long getting dressed. Or under flight, you might write, with my boss when she criticizes me for something I know is not true. Maybe under flight, you want to put, with my husband when he insists on entertaining his relatives when I want a quiet weekend alone. Some combos may belong under more than one heading. For example, you may hold back with your husband and then blow up later. Other combination examples might be with strangers in restaurants around smoking, in restaurants with a haughty waiter when returning unsatisfactory food, with physicians when they act condescendingly and I want more information, in meetings when I feel my ideas are being ignored. Turn off your tape now and make this last list of when you tend to fight, take flight, or manipulate. Congratulations! You now undoubtedly have a clearer view of where your setting limits problems lie. Let's continue this waking up process by now looking at the how come of your problems. How come you've been setting limits aggressively, non-assertively, or not at all?
This is the end of Tape 2, Side B. Please insert the next cassette and listen to Tape 3, Side A, as How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No continues. This is Tape 3, Side A, of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
Now that you better understand the who, when, what, and how of your present limit-setting style, it's time to look at the how come. What stands in the way of your acting assertively, standing up for yourself, and telling the truth? There are 5 major categories of obstacles that keep you from setting limits effectively. 1, lack of clarity. 2, lack of courage. 3, faulty thinking. 4, payoffs for acting otherwise. And 5, lack of skills. First of all, obstacle number 1, lack of clarity. As always, awareness is the first step to choice and to change. Knowing what you want or what you don't want in the first place is mandatory in limit setting. Frequently, the reason you don't speak your mind is because you haven't yet made your mind up. You don't know what you want or don't want, or where you in fact draw the line. There are several ways you can experience lack of clarity in limit setting: delayed awareness, partial awareness, confused awareness, and total oblivion. It's worth taking some time to look more closely at each of these. Delayed awareness occurs when you realize after the fact that you feel uncomfortable or upset with something that has happened. In real life, where you're bipping and bopping along with lots going on at once, this is often the way it happens, and that's okay. If this is the way it usually happens, however, where it's only afterwards that it dawns on you that you're not okay with what's gone on, when you go along with lots of things only to realize later that you don't really want to do them, then it's important for you to recognize this pattern and figure out ways to take the time you need to check with yourself and know your true feelings and desires earlier on. Delayed awareness is actually an encouraging sign because in most cases, it's not too late to undo or redo. Usually, you can call the person back and tell them that you've changed your mind. Usually, you can go to your boss later and bring up the fact that you don't want to be criticized in public. You want that done privately. With delayed awareness, you get extra time to pull yourself together and contemplate, even rehearse, how you want to communicate most effectively about the problem. On the spot, it's sometimes hard to say what you want to say because you're emotionally flooded and at a loss for words. The second way you can experience lack of clarity is with partial awareness. Partial awareness is when you only know part of your own reactions. You may know, for example, that you don't want to do something, but not fully understand how come you don't want to do it. Of course, this makes it hard to communicate and be honest with others, and it leads to making excuses instead of telling the truth, because you haven't told the truth to yourself yet. It's helpful to specifically analyze what's bothering you about a situation. For example, if someone in your office is coming in and socializing with you, and you've grown to resent these visits, analyze what about the situation is troubling you. It may be the length of the visits that bothers you, or maybe it's the frequency, or the timing at inopportune moments. It may be the content of the conversations during the visits, office gossip you don't want to be a part of. Maybe it's that you simply don't like this person and don't want to spend any time talking with them, no matter what they talk about or how much time you've got. By defining for yourself exactly what the problem is and what you want to change about the situation, you become much more effective in your message. Most limits are not all or nothing deals. Usually you're okay with this, but not with that. For example, if your mother-in-law wants a Sunday visit every week and you only want to visit once a month, setting partial limits allows some satisfaction to everybody involved. Another kind of lack of clarity results from confused awareness. This can occur when you have mixed feelings or mixed desires about a situation. For example, if someone asks you to take on a new responsibility, you may feel flattered by their confidence in you, overwhelmed by the demands of the job, scared that you won't be able to deliver, and annoyed that they don't appreciate everything else you're already doing. This multitude of emotions simultaneously experienced can greatly confuse you if you don't sort things out and comprehend the total emotional picture. In addition to the complexity of your feelings, you can also experience complex, conflicting desires at the very same moment. You can simultaneously want completely incompatible things. You may want and not want to chair that committee. You may want and not want to socialize with coworkers because you'd love to take a break, but you also want to finish an important project. You may want to take time off and play this weekend and also want to get your chores done so that you'll have the satisfaction of getting those things taken care of. Unless you're clear about the priorities of all these multiple desires, you're likely to end up doing what's lower on your list without even knowing it. Perhaps the most frustrating way to feel confused awareness is to honestly not know what you want. This occurs when either you don't take the time to figure this out, or when, even if you've taken the time, you aren't able to make up your mind. Women seem to have an especially hard time knowing what they want. Probably this is because women are raised to be people pleasers. They are taught from an early age to be responsive to what others want and not think about their own desires. Consequently, many women live their lives in a mostly responsive mode, responding to what others want from them and for them. What suits them, independent from everybody else's demands and expectations, is an afterthought, if it's thought of at all. The last and most extreme form of lack of clarity is total oblivion, when you're totally unconscious about your own feelings, reactions, and incompetence in setting limits. With this complete lack of awareness, your problems frequently get expressed physically. You end up with headaches, bleeding ulcers, high blood pressure, or cancer. Cancer research, has described a cancer-prone personality. someone described by family and friends as a saint, always doing for others rather than for themselves, martyring their own needs and ending up a victim in the process. Feelings, if you let them, act as a healthy barometer, an alarm system that alerts you to situations that need attention. When you stuff your feelings because you don't want to feel emotional discomfort, or when you stuff your feelings because you don't think yourself capable of expressing them effectively, this emotional energy turns inward, creating implosions and physical symptoms. Let's review the forms that obstacle number 1, lack of clarity, assumes. There's delayed awareness, partial awareness, confused awareness due to either mixed feelings or simply not knowing what you want, and total oblivion. To overcome lack of clarity, you must take the time, especially when there is a problem, to look inside and see what's going on. You must take the time to set priorities regularly, even when there is no problem at hand. And you must be willing to experience all your feelings, including uncomfortable ones. Let's look now at obstacle number 2, lack of courage. There are 3 main feelings that keep us from acting assertively around limits: fear, anger, and guilt. It's very important to distinguish these intense feelings that facilitate being assertive from the false emotional alarms which come from faulty thinking. These are barriers to assertive behavior. Guilt, for example, is often based on the faulty premise that you must take care of other people's problems, and that if you don't, you're a bad person or a bad friend. So you get yourself into rescue trips, where you sacrifice your own true desires or feelings to do for others. On the other hand, guilt can result from an honest determination that what you're doing is wrong. In this case, the guilt can serve as an alarm, alerting you that you need to change your behavior. The best way to determine the appropriateness of your feelings is to trace them back to the thoughts that prompted the feelings and to check out your internal dialogue for irrational, faulty components. The most common fears which create a lack of courage are 1, fear of hurting others, 2, fear of disapproval or rejection, 3, fear of conflict or making matters worse, and 4, fear of making a mistake or failing. Fear number 1, fear of hurting others. Some of the toughest limit-setting situations occur when another person is an innocent party, when they're not maliciously or intentionally doing something to bother you, but they're bothering you anyway. It's hard at these times to speak up because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want them to take it the wrong way and be offended. Responsible assertion means that while you take others' feelings into consideration and couch your message in a diplomatic way, you don't self-sacrifice and lie. Fear number 2, the fear of disapproval or rejection. The fear of criticism or disapproval runs many people's entire lives. I believe that more non-assertion springs from this one fear than from all the others combined. Think of all the times you've held back from being honest because you were afraid someone wouldn't like what you had to say. Closely allied to the fear of disapproval is the fear of rejection, the fear of others saying no to you or your ideas. The fear that if others don't like what you do, they may end the relationship, fire you, never call again, ignore you. The fear that if you set limits with someone, you'll never get another chance to say yes. For example, if you turn someone down for a date, you may worry that they won't ask you out again. Or if you say no to a project at work, you may worry that you'll be bypassed in the future for other opportunities. Fear number 3 is the fear of conflict or making matters worse. Of course, many people tell lies to avoid arguments and open conflict. You fear making a tolerable situation worse. You fear making a scene or losing control. It is true that bringing things out into the open involves some jeopardy. The risk, however, is always two-sided. Not only do you risk stirring things up, you risk clearing them up. You must be willing to risk if you want to live honestly. Of course, there are going to be times when telling the truth may not be wise. The last and 4th fear is the fear of making a mistake or failing. Sometimes people are afraid that if they set a limit today and change their mind tomorrow, it will be too late. Some things are irreversible, it's true, but usually this is not the case. Worrying that you won't be able to undo an assertion can hold you immobilized. Sometimes it's the fear of failure that holds you back. Worrying that being assertive won't do any good anyway can make you unwilling to take the risk of trying. We're going to turn now to perhaps the largest of all obstacles, obstacle number 3, faulty thinking. As I said before, faulty thinking is the cause of emotional false alarms. To decide if you're dealing with a false alarm or a real alarm emotionally, you must evaluate your thinking in a situation to see if it's faulty or not. Faulty thinking assumes many forms. Awareness or conscious incompetence is, as usual, essential if you want to begin assuming quality control over your thoughts. Here are 3 common forms of faulty thinking to watch for in your mind. 1. Irrational thinking. 2. Confusion over responsibility and rights. 3. Rationalizing. Let's look at these forms of faulty thinking one by one, even though in real life many of them may go on inside your head all at once. Number 1, irrational thinking. There are 3 kinds of irrational thinking to be on the lookout for. Catastrophizing, which is blowing things out of proportion. Always never thinking in absolutes. And must-have thinking, insisting or demanding. Catastrophizing occurs when you work yourself up, convincing yourself that a situation is so horrible that you can't stand it. Such thinking inevitably leads to fearful non-assertion or fearful aggression. Usually, catastrophizing involves a lot of what-ifing. What if I explode? What if they explode? What if I break down and cry? That would be so humiliating. What if they refuse to do it? What if this happens? What if that happens? You scare yourself into the behavioral extremes of non-assertion or aggression, into underreaction or overreaction. Catastrophizing carries a situation to the extremes. Oh my God, if I speak up here, I could get fired. And if I get fired, I'd be out in the streets. And I just can't stand being out of work again. People are going to think I'm a failure if I get fired. I might not be able to get good references. And I'd never get a job as good as this one again. You take yourself way off the deep end. Several irrational ideas fuel catastrophizing. One is that when life doesn't go your way, it's just terrible, just awful, and you won't be able to stand it. This belief creates feelings of helplessness and despair, which lead to giving up or acting combatively. Another irrational idea is that emotional misery comes from outside of yourself, and therefore you can't control it. Actually, this belief underlies the belief I just described, that you can't stand it when things go wrong. Feelings, in fact, are always self-induced. You always have a choice about who and what you allow to upset you, how long you allow it to upset you, and how much you allow it to upset you. If you see yourself as a victim to your circumstances, you will feel impotent when things don't go your way. There's also the irrational idea that people who harm you or do things that you think are bad or unfair are bad people, and they should be blamed or punished. When you think that thoughtless, incompetent people are bad and therefore deserve poor treatment in return, you set limits abusively instead of assertively. A last irrational belief is doubting your ability to effectively resist pressure from others. When you think that you can't withstand another's arguing or nudging you, you may come on like gangbusters to compensate. The second kind of irrational thinking to look for is always never thinking, the tendency to think in absolutes. This occurs when you selectively remember only the negative, convinced that he always does this to me, or I never get hurt at these meetings, or he is always so condescending to me. You also engage in always never thinking when you selectively imagine the future, picturing only the worst that could happen instead of all the possibilities. This is not an always never universe. The last kind of irrational thinking to look for is must-have thinking. Must-have thinking is very dangerous thinking because it paints you into a corner of very restricted choice. In reality, there are few things that you and I must have. Air and water are 2 of them. Almost everything else you can hold at the level of preference if you decide to, and you are in way better shape if you do that. It may seem like you must have this or that to feel good or to feel good about yourself, but if you look closer, you'll discover that this simply is not true. You've just convinced yourself that you must have someone's approval, or that you must have the raise that you've asked for, or that you must have things turn out the way you want them. A common must-have belief is the belief that you must have approval from everyone to prove that you're okay. This is an extremely crippling belief. In order for you to set limits assertively, it's essential that you start to see that the approval of others has nothing to do with your personal worth. Disapproval and rejection are merely the inevitable result of living in a world where everybody gets to have their own little point of view. There is no way you're going to escape disapproval or rejection. In fact, both can be quite instructive at times. For example, when others disapprove of you with good reason, you may well want to consider this and act accordingly. However, if someone disapproves of you only because you haven't met their expectations or conformed to what they want, that's another story. In order to risk assertion, you need to develop a healthy capacity to live with disapproval and rejection even when you don't like it. Rejection, of course, is a very close cousin to disapproval. Another irrational must-have belief is that everyone must always want to be in a relationship with you to prove that you're okay. If rejection destroys your self-esteem, you become an emotional hostage to others. The fear of rejection then blocks your consideration of how you can minimize the chance of rejection happening, or handle it if it does happen despite your best efforts. Another must-have belief that gets you into trouble is believing that you must be perfect at all times, that you must always be on top of things, proving your competency or adequacy. This, of course, creates extreme performance anxiety and also leads to a low tolerance for criticism, because criticism implies that you're not perfect. One last debilitating must-have thought is that you must have things be a certain way in order to feel happy. For example, you must have people treat you fairly, or you must have people understand your point of view. Recognizing that you can feel okay even when mistreated, or don't get what you want, doesn't mean that you do nothing at those times. It just means that you don't drive yourself into retreat or combat or misery by thinking that you can't stand it when that happens. Besides irrational thinking, the second major form that faulty thinking assumes is confusion over responsibility and rights, both your own and others. When you inappropriately take on responsibility for someone else's problem, or when you fail to take responsibility appropriately for your own problems, you end up with a limit-setting problem. For example, thinking that you're responsible for someone's hurt feelings can keep you from speaking out about a legitimate concern. If you think that they might feel hurt by what you say, you may well keep your mouth shut. Responsible assertion means that you do what you can do to treat others and yourself with respect. Now, if you make a snide remark, or ridicule someone, or violate their rights intentionally, it's appropriate for you to feel responsible. But if you simply refuse a date, express a disagreement, or suggest to a relative that the holiday visit be 4 days instead of 2 weeks, and you get a hurt or angry reaction, you are not responsible for that. Another common confusion over responsibility happens when you see yourself as the only one who can help in a situation, or when you see somebody else as helpless. Now, occasionally, this may be an accurate appraisal, but almost always it is not. And even if it is accurate, you still may not be able or willing to help out. When someone pleads with you, claiming that you're the only one they can turn to, it may feel hard to turn them down if that's what you honestly want to do. However, despite their legitimate need, your willingness or ability to assist them is for you to determine, and is independent of your caring about them and their distress. Confusion over rights is equally inhibiting. Forgetting your own rights leads to non-assertion. Forgetting the rights of others leads to aggression. Responsibilities are a reflection of the fact that, despite your unique separateness, you live life in a web of relationships, which you always also want to consider when acting assertively. Rights, on the other hand, are a reflection of your individuality. Assertiveness rests on the belief that you have certain basic human rights, and so does everybody else. You have a right to your own opinion, even if it's different from everybody's. You have a right to privacy. You have a right to be treated courteously by others. You have the right to experience and express your feelings. You have the right to slow down and think before you act or say yes. You have a right to say no and not feel guilty. You have the right to change your mind. Remembering your rights helps you express your feelings and stand up for yourself appropriately. I remember once at a dance, a man asked me to slow dance. He started dancing much closer than I wanted to, so I indirectly set my limits by stiffening up and distancing him away. We danced like this awkwardly for a few minutes, with him pushing to dance closer and me pushing away, until finally he abruptly stopped dancing and said in a nasty voice, "I know what you are. You're one of those women's livers who hates men." Then he stomped off the dance floor. Shocked, I left the dance floor too, and sat down to think about what had happened. I realized that had I felt more clear about my right to set limits physically in this situation, I might have been more direct with him, saying something like, I'm not comfortable dancing this close. Now, he still might not have liked that, and he still might have stomped off. But I know that had I been clearer on my right to say that, I would have felt more centered and more comfortable, no matter what his reaction. Setting limits assertively involves accepting both your personal rights and responsibilities and respecting the rights and responsibilities of others. It means accepting responsibility for teaching others how you want to be treated and telling them where you draw the line. When your rights conflict with somebody else's rights, setting limits assertively means looking at ways you can reasonably work out resolutions where everybody gets respected. One last category of faulty thinking is rationalizing, copping out with self-deception, talking yourself out of assertiveness. If a woman, for example, is having problems telling her lover what she wants sexually, she might rationalize, oh, well, it's not that important anyway. I can get along without it. I'm enjoying it some, so it's not a big deal. Now, if she was catastrophizing about the problem, she might think, my God, what if he thought I was a slut asking for that? What if he took it as a put-down, a threat to his masculinity? What would I do then? If she felt confused over responsibility, she might add the thought, and it would be my fault. If she was thinking in absolutes, she might think, men are all alike. They don't give a damn about what the woman wants. They just want to use her. To increase your ability to recognize faulty thinking in action, let's look at some other examples. Listen to the different kinds of faulty thinking in these situations. You and a friend have just gotten settled in a restaurant and have decided that the prices are way too high for your budget. You'd like to leave, but you're reluctant to do that because you're catastrophizing, thinking, well, we just can't get up and leave. I'd be so embarrassed. Everybody here would think we were rude or crazy or something. We're stuck. A rationalization might go, well, maybe it's so expensive because it's very good food. I guess I can spend the money if I don't go out for lunch the rest of the month. Or you might catastrophize yourself into leaving in a huff by thinking, boy, they have their nerve charging prices like this. What a ripoff. Here's a situation that could happen at work. Someone you're supervising is uncooperative and not doing his share of the work. This guy tends to act indifferent, even hostile to you, and you're thinking about confronting him on his attitude and his performance. Catastrophizing, you might think to yourself, what if he acts cold and nasty when I bring this up? I get so upset when he gives me one of those looks. I forget everything I want to say. That would only make matters worse. Or else, you could work yourself up into combativeness by telling yourself, I don't have to take this from anybody, least of all from somebody who works for me. The nerve of him, acting like he's king around here. I've had it. Either he shapes up or ships out. An always never thought might go, I never know how to handle people like this. He always gets so defensive and unpleasant when I talk to him. He never understands what I'm trying to say. Rationalizing, you might tell yourself, I think I'll wait and see if things just don't improve on their own. Maybe if I make some general comments at the staff meeting, he'll get the hint. Listen to your own inner dialogues before, during, and after difficult encounters. Discriminate between what's true and what's irrational. Think of a situation that occurred recently that you didn't handle so well because you got angry or intimidated. Remember what you were thinking when you became so upset. Sort out unrealistic assumptions. Identify your rights and your responsibilities as well as the other person's. Make sure that you probe beneath the surface of your inner dialogue. For example, if you were upset last week at your boss for yelling at you, at first you might think, well, I was just angry at my boss yelling at me. But if you became very upset by the episode, or if you obsessed about it after it was over, you were probably thinking thoughts like, how dare he speak to me like this? I didn't do anything to deserve this. I won't stand for it. He can't treat me like this. I won't take this abuse. Becoming consciously incompetent, becoming more self-aware of your own faulty thinking is a critical step in becoming more successful at setting limits. Let's now turn your attention to obstacle number 4, the payoffs for acting non-assertively or aggressively. On side 2, I described the payoffs for becoming more assertive. Unfortunately, there are also benefits to not changing, payoffs for continuing to act non-assertively or aggressively. And unless you're aware of these payoffs may block your changing. Here are some of the payoffs to non-assertion. One payoff is safety. Sometimes it's safer, or at least it can seem like it's safer, to do nothing. By doing nothing, you avoid the risk of hurting other people's feelings or provoking anger. Usually, though, it's an illusion that it's safer to do nothing. In fact, most of the time there's more jeopardy in keeping your mouth shut, because accumulated long suffering leads to blow-ups later on, or blow-ins, the emotional implosions and the physical problems I mentioned earlier. Another payoff to non-assertion is that when you act non-assertively, people may see you as polite and easygoing. Other people can actively reinforce your non-assertion by praising you for your flexibility and selflessness. Sometimes, of course, you may decide to give in or put others first for good reason. But when you make a habit of self-sacrificing, you end up a victim, often feeling resentful and unappreciated in the long run. It inevitably boomerangs back on you and your relationships and does nobody a favor at all. There are payoffs for aggression as well. Sometimes when you act aggressively, you get paid off with a feeling of power by intimidating others into doing things your way. Aggressive behavior can also pay off by protecting you from experiencing the scarier feelings of hurt, disappointment, and sadness. You may be more comfortable with feeling and expressing anger than you are with these more vulnerable feelings. Aggression pays off as well when you get results, when you get what you want by forcing or dominating. This too, however, turns into an illusion in the long run. When you get your way by bullying, you usually win the battles and lose the war. People get even with bullies. They do this by ending the relationship, by taking their marbles and going home. They do it with passive aggression. They get even by undermining, sabotaging, withholding. Finally, aggressive behavior pays off with its release of energy. It allows you to blow off steam. When you are habitually long-suffering, or when you work yourself up with catastrophizing, venting pent-up emotions can feel a relief. The last obstacle to setting limits, obstacle number 5, is lack of skills. Lots of times, people continue to be non-assertive or aggressive because they simply have never been taught anything else and know of no other way of expressing themselves. Of course, that's what this program is all about, giving you more choice.
This is the end of Cassette 3, Side A. Please fast forward to the end and listen to the other side as How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No continues. This is Tape 3, Side A, of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
Now that you better understand the who, when, what, and how of your present limit-setting style, it's time to look at the how-come. What stands in the way of your acting assertively, standing up for yourself, and telling the truth? There are 5 major categories of obstacles that keep you from setting limits effectively. 1, lack of clarity. 2, lack of courage. 3, faulty thinking. 4, payoffs for acting otherwise. And 5, lack of skills. First of all, obstacle number 1, lack of clarity. As always, awareness is the first step to choice and to change. Knowing what you want or what you don't want in the first place is mandatory in limit setting. Frequently, the reason you don't speak your mind is because you haven't yet made your mind up. You don't know what you want or don't want, or where you in fact draw the line. There are several ways you can experience lack of clarity in limit setting. Delayed awareness, partial awareness, confused awareness, and total oblivion. It's worth taking some time to look more closely at each of these. Delayed awareness occurs when you realize after the fact that you feel uncomfortable or upset with something that has happened. In real life, where you're bipping and bopping along with lots going on at once, this is often the way it happens, and that's okay. If this is the way it usually happens, however, where it's only afterwards that it dawns on you that you're not okay with what's gone on, when you go along with lots of things only to realize later that you don't really want to do them, then it's important for you to recognize this pattern and figure out ways to take the time you need to check with yourself and know your true feelings and desires earlier on. Delayed awareness is actually an encouraging sign because in most cases, it's not too late to undo or redo. Usually, you can call the person back and tell them that you've changed your mind. Usually, you can go to your boss later and bring up the fact that you don't want to be criticized in public. You want that done privately. With delayed awareness, you get extra time to pull yourself together and contemplate, even rehearse, how you want to communicate most effectively about the problem. On the spot, it's sometimes hard to say what you want to say because you're emotionally flooded and at a loss for words. The second way you can experience lack of clarity is with partial awareness. Partial awareness is when you only know part of your own reactions. You may know, for example, that you don't want to do something, but not fully understand how come you don't want to do it. Of course, this makes it hard to communicate and be honest with others, and it leads to making excuses instead of telling the truth, because you haven't told the truth to yourself yet. It's helpful to specifically analyze what's bothering you about a situation. For example, if someone in your office is coming in and socializing with you, and you've grown to resent these visits, analyze what about the situation is troubling you. It may be the length of the visits that bothers you, or maybe it's the frequency, or the timing at inopportune moments. It may be the content of the conversations during the visits, office gossip you don't want to be a part of. Maybe it's that you simply don't like this person and don't want to spend any time talking with them, no matter what they talk about or how much time you've got. By defining for yourself exactly what the problem is and what you want to change about the situation, you become much more effective in your message. Most limits are not all-or-nothing deals. Usually you're okay with this, but not with that. For example, if your mother-in-law wants a Sunday visit every week and you only want to visit once a month, setting partial limits allows some satisfaction to everybody involved. Another kind of lack of clarity results from confused awareness. This can occur when you have mixed feelings or mixed desires about a situation. For example, if someone asks you to take on a new responsibility, you may feel flattered by their confidence in you, overwhelmed by the demands of the job, scared that you won't be able to deliver, and annoyed that they don't appreciate everything else you're already doing. This multitude of emotions, simultaneously experienced, can greatly confuse you if you don't sort things out and comprehend the total emotional picture. In addition to the complexity of your feelings, you can also experience complex, conflicting desires at the very same moment. You can simultaneously want completely incompatible things. You may want and not want to chair that committee. You may want and not want to socialize with coworkers because you'd love to take a break, but you also want to finish an important project. You may want to take time off and play this weekend and also want to get your chores done so that you'll have the satisfaction of getting those things taken care of. Unless you're clear about the priorities of all these multiple desires, you're likely to end up doing what's lower on your list without even knowing it. Perhaps the most frustrating way to feel confused awareness is to honestly not know what you want. This occurs when either you don't take the time to figure this out, or when, even if you've taken the time, you aren't able to make up your mind. Women seem to have an especially hard time knowing what they want. Probably this is because women are raised to be people pleasers. They are taught from an early age to be responsive to what others want and not think about their own desires. Consequently, many women live their lives in a mostly responsive mode, responding to what others want from them and for them. What suits them, independent from everybody else's demands and expectations, is an afterthought, if it's thought of at all. The last and most extreme form of lack of clarity is total oblivion, when you're totally unconscious about your own feelings, reactions, and incompetence in setting limits. With this complete lack of awareness, your problems frequently get expressed physically. You end up with headaches, bleeding ulcers, high blood pressure, or cancer. Cancer research, has described a cancer-prone personality, someone described by family and friends as a saint, always doing for others rather than for themselves, martyring their own needs and ending up a victim in the process. Feelings, if you let them, act as a healthy barometer, an alarm system that alerts you to situations that need attention. When you stuff your feelings because you don't want to feel emotional discomfort, or when you stuff your feelings because you don't think yourself capable of expressing them effectively, this emotional energy turns inward, creating implosions and physical symptoms. Let's review the forms that obstacle number 1, lack of clarity, assumes. There's delayed awareness, partial awareness, confused awareness due to either mixed feelings or simply not knowing what you want, and total oblivion. To overcome lack of clarity, you must take the time, especially when there is a problem, to look inside and see what's going on. You must take the time to set priorities regularly, even when there is no problem at hand. And you must be willing to experience all your feelings, including uncomfortable ones. Let's look now at obstacle number 2, lack of courage. There are 3 main feelings that keep us from acting assertively around limits: fear, anger, and guilt. It's very important to distinguish these intense feelings that facilitate being assertive from the false emotional alarms which come from faulty thinking. These are barriers to assertive behavior. Guilt, for example, is often based on the faulty premise that you must take care of other people's problems, and that if you don't, you're a bad person or a bad friend. So you get yourself into rescue trips, where you sacrifice your own true desires or feelings to do for others. On the other hand, guilt can result from an honest determination that what you're doing is wrong. In this case, the guilt can serve as an alarm, alerting you that you need to change your behavior. The best way to determine the appropriateness of your feelings is to trace them back to the thoughts that prompted the feelings and to check out your internal dialogue for irrational, faulty components. The most common fears which create a lack of courage are 1, fear of hurting others, 2, fear of disapproval or rejection, 3, fear of conflict or making matters worse, and 4, fear of making a mistake or failing. Fear number 1, fear of hurting others. Some of the toughest limit-setting situations occur when another person is an innocent party, when they're not maliciously or intentionally doing something to bother you, but they're bothering you anyway. It's hard at these times to speak up because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want them to take it the wrong way and be offended. Responsible assertion means that while you take others' feelings into consideration and couch your message in a diplomatic way, you don't self-sacrifice and lie. Fear number 2, the fear of disapproval or rejection. The fear of criticism or disapproval runs many people's entire lives. I believe that more non-assertion springs from this one fear than from all the others combined. Think of all the times you've held back from being honest because you were afraid someone wouldn't like what you had to say. Closely allied to the fear of disapproval is the fear of rejection, the fear of others saying no to you or your ideas. The fear that if others don't like what you do, they may end the relationship, fire you, never call again, ignore you. The fear that if you set limits with someone, you'll never get another chance to say yes. For example, if you turn someone down for a date, you may worry that they won't ask you out again. Or if you say no to a project at work, you may worry that you'll be bypassed in the future for other opportunities. Fear number 3 is the fear of conflict or making matters worse. Of course, many people tell lies to avoid arguments and open conflict. You fear making a tolerable situation worse. You fear making a scene or losing control. It is true that bringing things out into the open involves some jeopardy. The risk, however, is always two-sided. Not only do you risk stirring things up, you risk clearing them up. You must be willing to risk if you want to live honestly. Of course, there are going to be times when telling the truth may not be wise. The last and 4th fear is the fear of making a mistake or failing. Sometimes people are afraid that if they set a limit today and change their mind tomorrow, it will be too late. Some things are irreversible, it's true, but usually this is not the case. Worrying that you won't be able to undo an assertion can hold you immobilized. Sometimes it's the fear of failure that holds you back. Worrying that being assertive won't do any good anyway can make you unwilling to take the risk of trying. We're going to turn now to perhaps the largest of all obstacles, obstacle number 3, faulty thinking. As I said before, faulty thinking is the cause of emotional false alarms. To decide if you're dealing with a false alarm or a real alarm emotionally, you must evaluate your thinking in a situation to see if it's faulty or not. Faulty thinking assumes many forms. Awareness or conscious incompetence is, as usual, essential if you want to begin assuming quality control over your thoughts. Here are 3 common forms of faulty thinking to watch for in your mind. 1. Irrational thinking. 2. Confusion over responsibility and rights. 3. Rationalizing. Let's look at these forms of faulty thinking one by one, even though in real life many of them may go on inside your head all at once. Number 1, irrational thinking. There are 3 kinds of irrational thinking to be on the lookout for. Catastrophizing, which is blowing things out of proportion. Always never thinking, thinking in absolutes. And must-have thinking, insisting or demanding. Catastrophizing occurs when you work yourself up, convincing yourself that a situation is so horrible that you can't stand it. Such thinking inevitably leads to fearful non-assertion or fearful aggression. Usually, catastrophizing involves a lot of what-ifing. What if I explode? What if they explode? What if I break down and cry? That would be so humiliating. What if they refuse to do it? What if this happens? What if that happens? You scare yourself into the behavioral extremes of non-assertion or aggression, into underreaction or overreaction. Catastrophizing carries a situation to the extremes. Oh my God, if I speak up here, I could get fired. And if I get fired, I'd be out in the streets. And I just can't stand being out of work again. People are going to think I'm a failure if I get fired. I might not be able to get good references. And I'd never get a job as good as this one again. You take yourself way off the deep end. Several irrational ideas fuel catastrophizing. One is that when life doesn't go your way, it's just terrible, just awful, and you won't be able to stand it. This belief creates feelings of helplessness and despair, which lead to giving up or acting combatively. Another irrational idea is that emotional misery comes from outside of yourself, and therefore you can't control it. Actually, this belief underlies the belief I just described, that you can't stand it when things go wrong. Feelings, in fact, are always self-induced. You always have a choice about who and what you allow to upset you, how long you allow it to upset you, and how much you allow it to upset you. If you see yourself as a victim to your circumstances, you will feel impotent when things don't go your way. There's also the irrational idea that people who harm you or do things that you think are bad or unfair are bad people, and they should be blamed or punished. When you think that thoughtless, incompetent people are bad and therefore deserve poor treatment in return, you set limits abusively instead of assertively. A last irrational belief is doubting your ability to effectively resist pressure from others. When you think that you can't withstand another's arguing or nudging you, you may come on like gangbusters to compensate. The second kind of irrational thinking to look for is always never thinking, the tendency to think in absolutes. This occurs when you selectively remember only the negative, convinced that he always does this to me, or I never get hurt at these meetings, or he is always so condescending to me. You also engage in always never thinking when you selectively imagine the future, picturing only the worst that could happen instead of all the possibilities. This is not an always never universe. The last kind of irrational thinking to look for is must-have thinking. Must-have thinking is very dangerous thinking because it paints you into a corner of very restricted choice. In reality, there are few things that you and I must have. Air and water are 2 of them. Almost everything else you can hold at the level of preference if you decide to, and you are in way better shape if you do that. It may seem like you must have this or that to feel good or to feel good about yourself, but if you look closer, you'll discover that this simply is not true. You've just convinced yourself that you must have someone's approval, or that you must have the raise that you've asked for, or that you must have things turn out the way you want them. A common must-have belief is the belief that you must have approval from everyone to prove that you're okay. This is an extremely crippling belief. In order for you to set limits assertively, it's essential that you start to see that the approval of others has nothing to do with your personal worth. Disapproval and rejection are merely the inevitable result of living in a world where everybody gets to have their own little point of view. There is no way you're going to escape disapproval or rejection. In fact, both can be quite instructive at times. For example, when others disapprove of you with good reason, you may well want to consider this and act accordingly. However, if someone disapproves of you only because you haven't met their expectations or conformed to what they want, that's another story. In order to risk assertion, you need to develop a healthy capacity to live with disapproval and rejection, even when you don't like it. Rejection, of course, is a very close cousin to disapproval. Another irrational must-have belief is that everyone must always want to be in a relationship with you to prove that you're okay. If rejection destroys your self-esteem, you become an emotional hostage to others. The fear of rejection then blocks your consideration of how you can minimize the chance of rejection happening, or handle it if it does happen despite your best efforts. Another must-have belief that gets you into trouble is believing that you must be perfect at all times, that you must always be on top of things, proving your competency or adequacy. This, of course, creates extreme performance anxiety and also leads to a low tolerance for criticism, because criticism implies that you're not perfect. One last debilitating must-have thought is that you must have things be a certain way in order to feel happy. For example, you must have people treat you fairly, or you must have people understand your point of view. Recognizing that you can feel okay even when mistreated, or don't get what you want, doesn't mean that you do nothing at those times. It just means that you don't drive yourself into retreat or combat or misery by thinking that you can't stand it when that happens. Besides irrational thinking, the second major form that faulty thinking assumes is confusion over responsibility and rights, both your own and others. When you inappropriately take on responsibility for someone else's problem, or when you fail to take responsibility appropriately for your own problems, you end up with a limit-setting problem. For example, thinking that you're responsible for someone's hurt feelings can keep you from speaking out about a legitimate concern. If you think that they might feel hurt by what you say, you may well keep your mouth shut. Responsible assertion means that you do what you can do to treat others and yourself with respect. Now, if you make a snide remark, or ridicule someone, or violate their rights intentionally, it's appropriate for you to feel responsible. But if you simply refuse a date, express a disagreement, or suggest to a relative that the holiday visit be 4 days instead of 2 weeks, and you get a hurt or angry reaction, you are not responsible for that. Another common confusion over responsibility happens when you see yourself as the only one who can help in a situation, or when you see somebody else as helpless. Now, occasionally, this may be an accurate appraisal, but almost always it is not. And even if it is accurate, you still may not be able or willing to help out. When someone pleads with you, claiming that you're the only one they can turn to, it may feel hard to turn them down if that's what you honestly want to do. However, despite their legitimate need, your willingness or ability to assist them is for you to determine, and is independent of your caring about them and their distress. Confusion over rights is equally inhibiting. Forgetting your own rights leads to non-assertion. Forgetting the rights of others leads to aggression. Responsibilities are a reflection of the fact that, despite your unique separateness, you live life in a web of relationships, which you always also want to consider when acting assertively. Rights, on the other hand, are a reflection of your individuality. Assertiveness rests on the belief that you have certain basic human rights, and so does everybody else. You have a right to your own opinion, even if it's different from everybody's. You have a right to privacy. You have a right to be treated courteously by others. You have the right to experience and express your feelings. You have the right to slow down and think before you act or say yes. You have a right to say no and not feel guilty. You have the right to change your mind. Remembering your rights helps you express your feelings and stand up for yourself appropriately. I remember once at a dance, a man asked me to slow dance. He started dancing much closer than I wanted to, so I indirectly set my limits by stiffening up and distancing him away. We danced like this awkwardly for a few minutes, with him pushing to dance closer and me pushing away, until finally he abruptly stopped dancing and said in a nasty voice, "I know what you are. You're one of those women's livers who hates men." Then he stomped off the dance floor. Shocked, I left the dance floor too and sat down to think about what had happened. I realized that had I felt more clear about my right to set limits physically in this situation, I might have been more direct with him, saying something like, I'm not comfortable dancing this close. Now, he still might not have liked that, and he still might have stomped off. But I know that had I been clearer on my right to say that, I would have felt more centered and more comfortable, no matter what his reaction. Setting limits assertively involves accepting both your personal rights and responsibilities and respecting the rights and responsibilities of others. It means accepting responsibility for teaching others how you want to be treated and telling them where you draw the line. When your rights conflict with somebody else's rights, setting limits assertively means looking at ways you can reasonably work out resolutions where everybody gets respected. One last category of faulty thinking is rationalizing, copping out with self-deception, talking yourself out of assertiveness. If a woman, for example, is having problems telling her lover what she wants sexually, she might rationalize, oh, well, it's not that important anyway. I can get along without it. I'm enjoying it some, so it's not a big deal. Now, if she was catastrophizing about the problem, she might think, my God, what if he thought I was a slut asking for that? What if he took it as a put-down, a threat to his masculinity? What would I do then? If she felt confused over responsibility, she might add the thought, and it would be my fault. If she was thinking in absolutes, she might think, men are all alike. They don't give a damn about what the woman wants. They just want to use her. To increase your ability to recognize faulty thinking in action, let's look at some other examples. Listen to the different kinds of faulty thinking in these situations. You and a friend have just gotten settled in a restaurant and have decided that the prices are way too high for your budget. You'd like to leave, but you're reluctant to do that because you're catastrophizing, thinking, well, we just can't get up and leave. I'd be so embarrassed. Everybody here would think we were rude or crazy or something. We're stuck. A rationalization might go, well, maybe it's so expensive because it's very good food. I guess I can spend the money if I don't go out for lunch the rest of the month. Or you might catastrophize yourself into leaving in a huff by thinking, boy, they have their nerve charging prices like this. What a ripoff. Here's a situation that could happen at work. Someone you're supervising is uncooperative and not doing his share of the work. This guy tends to act indifferent, even hostile to you, and you're thinking about confronting him on his attitude and his performance. Catastrophizing, you might think to yourself, what if he acts cold and nasty when I bring this up? I get so upset when he gives me one of those looks. I forget everything I want to say. That would only make matters worse. Or else, you could work yourself up into combativeness by telling yourself, I don't have to take this from anybody, least of all from somebody who works for me. The nerve of him, acting like he's king around here. I've had it. Either he shapes up or ships out. An always never thought might go, I never know how to handle people like this. He always gets so defensive and unpleasant when I talk to him. He never understands what I'm trying to say. Rationalizing, you might tell yourself, I think I'll wait and see if things just don't improve on their own. Maybe if I make some general comments at the staff meeting, he'll get the hint. Listen to your own inner dialogues before, during, and after difficult encounters. Discriminate between what's true and what's irrational. Think of a situation that occurred recently that you didn't handle so well because you got angry or intimidated. Remember what you were thinking when you became so upset. Sort out unrealistic assumptions. Identify your rights and your responsibilities as well as the other person's. Make sure that you probe beneath the surface of your inner dialogue. For example, if you were upset last week at your boss for yelling at you, at first you might think, well, I was just angry at my boss yelling at me. But if you became very upset by the episode, or if you obsessed about it after it was over, you were probably thinking thoughts like, how dare he speak to me like this? I didn't do anything to deserve this. I won't stand for it. He can't treat me like this. I won't take this abuse. Becoming consciously incompetent, becoming more self-aware of your own faulty thinking is a critical step in becoming more successful at setting limits. Let's now turn your attention to obstacle number 4, the payoffs for acting non-assertively or aggressively. On side 2, I described the payoffs for becoming more assertive. Unfortunately, there are also benefits to not changing, payoffs for continuing to act non-assertively or aggressively. And unless you're aware of these payoffs may block your changing. Here are some of the payoffs to non-assertion. One payoff is safety. Sometimes it's safer, or at least it can seem like it's safer, to do nothing. By doing nothing, you avoid the risk of hurting other people's feelings or provoking anger. Usually, though, it's an illusion that it's safer to do nothing. In fact, most of the time there's more jeopardy in keeping your mouth shut, because accumulated long suffering leads to blow-ups later on, or blow-ins, the emotional implosions and the physical problems I mentioned earlier. Another payoff to non-assertion is that when you act non-assertively, people may see you as polite and easygoing. Other people can actively reinforce your non-assertion by praising you for your flexibility and selflessness. Sometimes, of course, you may decide to give in or put others first for good reason. But when you make a habit of self-sacrificing, you end up a victim, often feeling resentful and unappreciated in the long run. It inevitably boomerangs back on you and your relationships and does nobody a favor at all. There are payoffs for aggression as well. Sometimes when you act aggressively, you get paid off with a feeling of power by intimidating others into doing things your way. Aggressive behavior can also pay off by protecting you from experiencing the scarier feelings of hurt, disappointment, and sadness. You may be more comfortable with feeling and expressing anger than you are with these more vulnerable feelings. Aggression pays off as well when you get results, when you get what you want by forcing or dominating. This too, however, turns into an illusion in the long run. When you get your way by bullying, you usually win the battles and lose the war. People get even with bullies. They do this by ending the relationship, by taking their marbles and going home. They do it with passive aggression. They get even by undermining, sabotaging, withholding. Finally, aggressive behavior pays off with its release of energy. It allows you to blow off steam. When you are habitually long-suffering, or when you work yourself up with catastrophizing, venting pent-up emotions can feel a relief. The last obstacle to setting limits, obstacle number 5, is lack of skills. Lots of times, people continue to be non-assertive or aggressive because they simply have never been taught anything else and know of no other way of expressing themselves. Of course, that's what this program is all about, giving you more choice.
This is the end of Cassette 3, Side A. Please fast forward to the end and listen to the other side as How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No continues. This is Tape 4, Side A of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
It's time to look at the specific techniques for setting limits successfully. The methods I'll be illustrating refer to the how-to of your assertion as opposed to the what, the content of what you say. In real-life assertion, you use many of these different skills at once, but for simplicity's sake, we'll be looking at each one by one. Right now, as you learn the skills, you'll probably want to take time out whenever you can get it. Here are some examples of ways you can ask for time out. Let me get back to you on this. I'm not sure how I feel. I need to think about it. Before I say yes, I need to check a few things. I'm feeling very upset right now about this. I don't want to talk about it anymore now. I'll talk with you later, but right now I want some time out. This isn't a good time for me to respond. How about if I call you in the morning? A lot of us feel under the gun and respond too quickly before thinking things through. Most of the time, when you feel this pressure to respond right away, you do have a choice to take some time before doing so, even if it's only a few minutes to collect yourself and make up your mind. Don't overlook this delay tactic. Start to challenge the assumption that you have to respond immediately. With certain people, or with certain kinds of invitations or requests, you may choose to routinely take time before responding. If you have trouble saying no to relatives, for example, you may want to have your words ready when they ask you to Sunday supper. It might be, let me check with Jane about our weekend schedule. Or, I'll need to look in my other appointment book first to see if anything has been planned. If saying no to work assignments is the problem you have, your line could be, I'd like to get back to you after I check my other commitments. When do you need to know about this? You have the right to take time to consider everything before acting. Needless to say, you can overplay this strategy and turn people off with constant delay tactics, so be discriminating and don't abuse the idea. The next 4 upfront skills, prescribing the symptom, stating your positive intentions, saying what you're not intending, and expressing your empathy, are all ways to cushion your assertiveness, soften the blow, so to speak. Upfront skill number 2, prescribing the symptom, is a very useful technique. It's a way to minimize the risk that what you're afraid will happen will actually happen. Basically, the technique involves stating out loud your concern or your expectation about how the other person might respond. Ironically, doing this seems to make it less likely that what you're concerned about will occur. For example, if you're afraid someone's going to have a hard time hearing what you have to say and is going to get defensive, you say, this may be hard for you to hear at first, and you may feel defensive. So I'd like for you to just hear me out and not react right away. Or if you're afraid someone might blow up, you say, I've been reluctant to talk with you about this because I've been afraid you get mad and blow up at me. Or if you think someone's going to take what you have to say the wrong way, you say, I want to make sure you don't misunderstand this. My turning you down is not about you personally. Upfront skill number 3 is stating your positive intentions. This is a way to set the stage and orient the situation in a positive way. Stating positive intentions sets a certain mood, and it makes it clear to others that you're well-intentioned in your assertion. One of the reasons why it's sometimes hard for others to accept assertiveness is because they jump to the conclusion that you want to make them wrong, or end the relationship, or reject them personally. Positive intentions reassure them of your motives, and they help create a cooperative climate for resolution. Here are some examples of positive motives that are relevant when you set limits. I'd like to clear this thing up. That's why I want to talk things over. I want to avoid this kind of misunderstanding in the future. I'd like to work this out so that we both feel okay about it. I want to treat you with respect, and I want to be treated with respect as well. I'd like you to understand my side of this. I'd like to hear your side of the story. I'd like to clear the air. I want to be completely honest with you. I want to make sure there's no resentment about this. I want our relationship to work, so I'd like to settle this. Upfront skill number 4 is stating what you're not intending. Many times, it's just as important to express what you're not intending as well as what you are. As with prescribing the symptom, use this process when you anticipate a negative response or you think you may be misunderstood. Saying what you're not intending, or don't mean, is easier than trying to clear things up after the fact. Once, for example, wanting to be nice, I pointed out to some guy that he had parked his car in a no parking zone. I wasn't criticizing him. I had just seen tow trucks hauling cars away from that spot, so I was being friendly. But he got very nasty and very defensive and acted like it was none of my business where he parked. It would have probably helped had I added, I'm not meaning this to be critical of you, but that is a no parking zone, and they tow all the time around here. Here are some more illustrations of saying explicitly what you're not intending. I don't mean to be unfriendly. I just like spending lunch hours by myself. It's the only time alone I get. I don't want to be rude, but I do need to be honest with you. I believe this information is confidential, and I'm not at liberty to share it. It's not that I'm trying to be uncooperative. I don't mean to cut you off, but I do have to get off the phone now to handle a situation here in the office. I'm not comfortable getting involved in this, and I'm not saying this to judge you. I'm not trying to make you wrong. I do, however, have a different opinion. I want to clear this up, not have a fight over it. I don't mean to inconvenience you, but I need more time before making up my mind. I wanted to let you know about this for your own good, not to be intrusive. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I'm just not interested in dating you. The last upfront skill is expressing your empathy, letting others know that you sincerely appreciate their side even if you don't agree or decide to help them. When someone wants to borrow your car, for example, you might say, "I appreciate you're in a bind without a car, but I'll tell you, I'm not comfortable loaning out my car to anyone, even to real close friends." Or turning down a request for money, you would first say, "I appreciate you're in bad straits right now and really need this loan. I don't have the money to give you myself." Or say you have a crammed schedule ahead of you and someone comes in to ask you for help on an urgent project because their assistant's sick. While you can honestly empathize with their dilemma, your projects are urgent as well. So you sincerely say, "I understand your need for help right now. I'm really sorry I can't give it to you. I've got a pile of 8 priorities myself that have got to be done today." With sincere empathy at the front end, you express understanding and honest caring about the other person's situation. Here are a few more examples of empathic assertions. "I see you've got good reason for wanting to continue doing it this way. I still want to try out the new method. I agree you have a perfect right to ask for this. I am going to say no, however, for right now." It seems like you have a well-researched opinion. Even with these facts, however, I do have a different viewpoint. I understand that you're convinced I'm the only one that can help you with this. I'm sorry I don't have the time to do it. To quickly review these 5 upfront skills, take the time you need, prescribe the symptom if you're worried about a negative response, state your positive intentions out loud, let others know what you're not intending if your assertion might be taken the wrong way, and convey empathy when you feel it, even if you don't agree or need to turn someone down. Now that we've considered these 5 upfront skills, let's turn to 7 additional powerful techniques for setting limits. Skill number 1 is speaking for yourself. The cardinal principle of all assertive communication is speaking for yourself. When you speak for yourself, you tag what you say as your own point of view. You let it be known that it is your perception or opinion or feeling or desire or behavior that you're talking about. The 2 other styles of communication besides speaking for yourself are speaking for others and speaking for nobody. Let me talk a bit about these, and then I'll tell you more about speaking for yourself. When you speak for others, you say things like, "You aren't listening to me," or "You never intended to talk with him about it," or "You don't care how I feel." These statements are called you messages. We messages and let's messages are other ways of speaking for others. We need to get things out in the open. Let's not do that now. Here's what we should do. Oh, we don't mind. Most people really resent being spoken for, unless, of course, there's been a previous agreement about it. Speaking for others with either you messages or the collective we or let's implies you know better than they do how they think, feel, or what they want or need. This kind of communication is often parental in tone with lots of shoulds and ought tos. It's a presumptuous way of saying what you want to say. Whether you're right or wrong is irrelevant. Other people almost always resent and resist being spoken for. Speaking for nobody, on the other hand, leaves the ownership of what you say totally up in the air. For example, when you say, "That's not the right way to do it." Who thinks it's not the right way? Or the statement, "It really doesn't matter." It doesn't matter to whom? Or, "One might think you didn't care." Or, "There's a good movie playing. It might be fun to go to." Who wants to go to the movie? Speaking for nobody shows a lack of self-respect and a reluctance to label what you say as your own point of view. It's weak, indirect, evasive, and very frequently misleading. In contrast to these 2 styles, speaking for yourself shows a willingness to be open with others about where you stand without any demand that they see things the same way as you do. You simply give your perspective without an implication of right or wrong. Here are some examples of speaking for yourself. In my opinion, this is the best way to do it. I'm confused. I'm not sure what to think. I'm feeling pressured right now and want some time to think about this. I consider that a private matter and do not want to talk about it. I really appreciate your extra effort. I'd love to go see this show tonight. It seems to me you're not listening. I want to be alone for a while. I can't stress enough what a difference it makes when you say what you want to say in this speaking for yourself style. For one thing, it makes it much easier for others to be honest and self-disclosive back with you. You reduce defensiveness in others. There is a world of difference between saying to someone, "You're wrong," and saying instead, I see it differently. There's a world of difference between saying that's no good and saying I don't like it. Between it's really rude to interrupt people and I don't want to be interrupted. You dramatically affect how other people react to you by following this very simple principle of assertive communication religiously. Skill number 2, being specific. The second basic skill of effective limit setting is specificity, learning to pinpoint what's bothering you and what you want or don't want. Specificity, of course, depends on self-awareness. If a colleague drops in at your desk most mornings to sit and gripe about her husband, if you can be specific with her about your negative reactions, you'll get way better results. Is it the length of the visit that's the problem for you? Or is it the frequency? Or the timing? Is it what she talks about? Do you feel uncomfortable hearing intimate information about her marriage? If you can say, I love having coffee and catching up occasionally, but it doesn't work for me to visit while I'm at my desk. Or say, perhaps, I enjoy our friendship a lot, but to be truthful, I don't feel comfortable hearing about your husband's sexual problems. Here are a few other examples of specific limits. I want to work on this assignment alone, but I would like to be able to call you if I run into a problem I can't handle. Would that be okay with you? If we take time off this afternoon, I must get a few chores done first. I'd love some feedback on my work, especially your positive reactions. I'd really appreciate encouragement in any area you see improvement. Staying specific helps discourage tendencies to label and judge others. Instead of judging and labeling, when you're specific, you describe behavior kind of like a videotape camera sees it. Instead of, I don't like your rude behavior, you say, I don't like it when you correct my grammar in front of friends. Instead of saying, I want you to be more thoughtful, you say, I want you to call me if you're going to be late. The more specific you are about your limits, the more likely your limits will be respected. When a friend keeps you waiting, let them know specifically why it's a problem for you, that the lateness makes you late, or that you went out of your way to rush and be ready on time for nothing. Instead of a sullen silence or an angry, you've got a nerve keeping me waiting, say, listen, I rushed to be ready on time. When you don't call me ahead of time to let me know you're going to be late, I really resent it. I went to all that trouble for nothing. If you're going to be late, I want you to call me ahead of time so I can use that extra time myself and not rush. Specific limits give others a more complete picture, and therefore they make it more likely that they'll understand you. Another aspect of being specific involves detailing what your position is based on. When you explain, for example, what has specifically led you to conclude that someone isn't listening to you, that it's been the way they've been turning around every 2 minutes to see who else was coming in the restaurant, this gives both of you important information in ultimately understanding what's going on. Being specific means saying to your boss, when I saw those papers on Mary's desk, I took it to mean she's now on the project, and to tell you the truth, that really confused me. Being nonspecific means blowing up to your boss with, I don't know what's going on around here, but if Mary's now on this project, I want off. Being specific also means indicating how much you want something, or to what degree you feel or believe something. Saying, I strongly prefer we do it this way, but I'll accept it if we don't. Or, I am positive that I didn't promise you that. Or, I'm highly offended by the treatment I've received. By the way, being specific means letting others know what you want and what you're willing to do, as well as what you don't want. For example, I'm willing to hear what I've done that's made you angry, but I don't want you yelling at me. Specificity recognizes that most situations are not simple either-or decisions. Many times you'll be willing to do so much, but no more. Or under certain circumstances, a situation will be acceptable to you, but under others it won't be. You might be happy to go out to dinner with somebody if you don't have to dress up. You might be willing to accept a product with a flaw in it if you get a reduction in price. You might be willing to stay another 10 minutes at a party, but no more. You might be willing to chair a committee if you have the use of a support staff and certain resources. You might be willing to go to your families for dinner on Sunday, but only if the evening ends early. Being specific in these ways is a really healthy use of yes buts. Skill number 3 is watching your nonverbals. Paying attention to your nonverbal behavior to ensure a congruent delivery, one where your nonverbal language matches what you say. Some of the critical nonverbal components to monitor are your tone of voice, the volume you speak at, your eye contact, your gestures, and your posture. Your nonverbal messages will either support or undermine your assertion. Unfortunately, all too often it's the latter case. Congruency is the key to preventing this self-sabotage. If you tell someone you're angry and you want them to stop what they're doing with a big smile on your face, needless to say, you send out a mixed message. Let's look closely at each nonverbal variable one by one. First, there's tone of voice. I personally consider tone of voice to be one of the two most important elements in a powerful assertive delivery. Eye contact is the other one. Your tone of voice can inappropriately express all sorts of things: apology, seduction, sarcasm, anger, fear, insecurity, impatience. Actually, your tone of voice sometimes tells the truth when you're not. The second nonverbal to watch out for is eye contact. Your eyes are the doorway to your soul, so it's not surprising that making comfortable, appropriate eye contact makes a big difference in whether or not you get through to someone. When you look someone in the eye, it tells them that you're not afraid. Especially when you're dealing with an aggressive person, if you lower your eyes or in some other way avoid direct eye contact, it's very unlikely they're going to take you seriously. Even if the other person fails to make eye contact with you, if he's shifty-eyed or she avoids your eyes, you can still sustain eye contact, and it still works. Now, don't get into a stare down. That's not the idea. Just look into their eyes and radiate from your own that you're telling the truth and that you're not afraid. Eye contact implies that you are telling the truth, because unless you're a practiced liar, you probably look away when you say something you know is not true. Diverting your eyes for both men and women is a way to avoid tension or anxiety. In addition, women have been taught that making eye contact is risky, brazen even. So when you're feeling nervous about asserting to begin with, making eye contact can be especially hard to do. The good news is practice makes perfect. The other good news is that when you make eye contact, even if you're scared, the eye contact itself lowers your anxiety. The third nonverbal to be aware of is volume. Women are also taught to inhibit voice volume, that it's not ladylike to speak loudly. Some women are uncomfortable around loud voices as well. Effective assertion doesn't require a booming voice. In fact, that works against you. But it does absolutely require a voice that can be easily heard and understood. A small, soft-spoken voice will radically affect how others perceive you. When you speak with a little voice, you, in 1 second, convey fear, low energy, low self-esteem, and lack of power. The last nonverbal to be aware of is your body language. Especially your posture tells other people your opinion of yourself. What you say with your body gives a stronger message than what you say with your words. When you use critical, accusing gestures, when you back away physically, stand with your hands on your hips, stand with slumped shoulders, a lowered head, when you jingle your change nervously, play with your jewelry, smile insincerely, glare, wince, or do any of 1,000 other nonverbal things with your face and body, these actions do speak louder than words. Becoming consciously incompetent means you monitor how you're coming across nonverbally. This self-monitoring is not done in a crippling, judgmental, self-conscious way. It's a caring, gentle witnessing of yourself. Rehearse your assertiveness ahead of time. Use a mirror and watch your expressions, your posture, your gestures for incongruencies that broadcast to everybody your nervousness and lack of confidence. Skill number 4, separating intentions from effect. Intentions do not always equal effect. The best of intentions can feel on the receiving end unpleasant or negative. If you think someone's intentions are good, you might be reluctant to set limits with them because you don't want to hurt their feelings. At times like this, it's helpful to differentiate between a person's intentions and your reactions. Let them know that you see their intentions as good ones, or at least you assume they're good, even if you want them to change what they're doing. For example, you say, "I can see you're wanting to be helpful, but I really don't want any help right now." Or you say, "I can appreciate you're just joking around, but I'm not comfortable with that kind of a remark, even as a joke." You assure them that you assume good intentions on their part. Sometimes it's your intentions that may be misinterpreted by somebody else, or anyway, that's what you're afraid might happen. In this case, you want to do what I suggested in upfront skill number 4. Say what you are not intending. To make sure someone doesn't misunderstand, you might say, "I'm not meaning to be rude. I just don't feel like talking right now." Or, "I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, but I need you to know I'm not willing to cover for you anymore when you come in late to work." Or, "It's not that I don't trust you. It's just that I don't want to discuss this matter. I consider it private." The last 3 process skills I'm going to describe are geared to finding out more about the other side of the situation. Setting limits, of course, is not only about you and your feelings. If you want to uncover misunderstandings, fully understand and clear up confusion, you're going to sometimes need to ask smart questions, ask for a response from others, and listen actively to whatever they share with you. Skill number 5 is asking what I call inquiry questions. Ask questions to get missing or incomplete information. Ask questions to check out assumptions you're making to discover which ones are accurate, which ones are not. Inquiry questions are simple, provocative, to-the-point questions that help others be more direct with you. They lead to all kinds of revelations that clear up confusion and misunderstandings. You can't count on others to give you the information you need to fully understand them. Often you're going to need to take the initiative and ask for it yourself. Inquiries are also helpful in checking out the implications of what someone has said or done. If a friend makes a sarcastic-sounding comment, for example, and you're not sure how to take it, ask, "I'm not sure how to take that. Are you meaning that sarcastically, or are you serious?" If someone makes a remark with improper implications, ask them, "I'm not sure how to take that. How do you mean that?" Check things out. Get things out in the open. Generally speaking, you can inquire into 5 different areas: perception, thought, feelings, desires, and actions. Skill number 6 is asking for a response. Sometimes a person will be unresponsive to what you say. They might just look at you silently, or say nothing, or change the subject, or walk away. This leaves you in the dark as to whether or not you got through to them, how they feel about what you've said, or if they're going to respect your limit. While they have a perfect right to not respond, it is appropriate for you to take the initiative and encourage responsiveness. You might say, "I'd like to know what you're thinking," or "I'd like to hear your responses to what I've said." If you pick up resistance from someone, you might ask about it. "I notice you hesitated. Do you have some considerations about doing this?" Or, "It sounds to me like you're uncertain. Are you still confused?" You might ask, "Do you have a problem with this? Would you mind doing this?" Encourage them to express what they want or don't want by saying something like, "I've told you how I want to spend the day. What would you like to do?" In this way, you make it easy for others to set limits with you. If you're asking a favor, you might say, "If you don't feel comfortable doing this, please let me know." Or, "If this is a problem for you, please tell me. I'll understand." The last skill, number 7, is active listening. Active listening is an important part of limit setting. When you do get response from others, there's no better way than active listening for truly understanding what they tell you. At certain times, active listening will be inappropriate. For example, with my kids in the market, I wasn't interested in understanding their feelings or opinions about sugar loops. I wanted to end the subject and move on. When you don't have the time or the interest, active listening is actually a violation of your own limits. At that time, it's better to say, "As I have already said, I can't do this. I'm sorry that I don't have the time to talk about it anymore."
This is the end of Cassette 4, Side A. Fast forward to the end and listen to the other side, as How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No concludes. This is Tape 4, Side B, the conclusion of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No by Maria Arapakis.
Let's begin with this idea of muscle. The concept of muscle level rests on the wisdom of setting limits early on rather than waiting until a lot of resentment or anxiety has built up. When limits are set at an early stage, usually the situation can be handled with a minimum of fuss and bother. If you wait until you're at your rope's end or your patience has run out, it's likely you'll overreact and make matters worse. A lot of times people start out by being indirect or nonverbal about what's bothering them. They pout, they sulk, they give dirty looks, they drop a hint, they wear a long face, and then when the other person doesn't get the hint, they get mad and they act aggressively. Using appropriate muscle level helps you keep your reactions appropriate to the situation. And when limits are set in appropriate ways, you're way more likely to get what you're after. Being able to start your limit setting at a low muscle level early on assumes both self-awareness and the courage to take care of the problem even if you're nervous or uncomfortable about doing that. Or it assumes that if you are experiencing a high degree of legitimate upset feelings, even if it's an overreaction because of catastrophizing, you will discharge these emotions in some responsible way before asserting. You can do that in a lot of ways, by screaming into a pillow, or by using the techniques to calm yourself down that I shared with you on tape 4. For example, by creating an eye of the storm for yourself where you regain your composure, by having a friend actively listen to you, or by writing things out. Using muscle levels serves another function besides helping you act appropriately and escalate gradually when you need to. It also improves your credibility because it demonstrates to other people that you mean what you say and they should take you seriously. This is especially important if you've got a history of non-assertion, where people have found out that you'll back down if they ignore you or bully you. A secretary in a firm I was working with shared with me how upset she was because no one took her seriously. She told me how she had announced at a staff meeting that she wasn't going to help fill out medical forms anymore. She even gave out handouts with answers to all the most commonly asked questions about the forms so that everybody could easily do them on their own. Yet after doing all this, she was still approached every day with pleas for help. "No one takes me seriously," she griped. So I asked her what she was doing when asked for help. Guess what? She was giving it. Who needs to take her seriously? She's the one who needs to take her own limits seriously. And to do this, she needed to up her muscle level. The only person who needs to take your limits seriously is you. And to make this happen, you use muscle. There are 4 muscle levels you can use when setting limits. When you start out at muscle level 1 with a low-level assertion, the low-level part means you say what you say in a civil tone of voice. At muscle level 1, you give whoever else is involved the benefit of the doubt. You act on the best possible assumption you can make in the situation. And you assume that once you've talked to them, they'll most likely be considerate and cooperative. This kind of positive assumption making gives you courage to speak up and sets a positive tone for your limit setting. At muscle level 1, watch that your body language is not combative. Don't clench your fist or scold with a pointed finger, or stand with hands on your hips or your head thrust forward. Use body language that shows you feel relaxed and comfortable, even if you don't. In a very favorite book of mine, Prescriptions for Happiness, Ken Kai's the author, says that the trick in getting cooperation from other people is to ask for what you want, no matter how badly you want it, with the same tone of voice you'd use if you were asking somebody to please pass the salt and pepper. Muscle level 2 is used when others don't immediately cooperate with you. This is the point at which many people who are new to being assertive get discouraged, and they throw up their hands and say, "I tried it, it didn't work. I finally got the courage to say something, didn't do any good." Simply stated, at muscle level 2, you repeat your limit. But it's more than that. Your verbal and nonverbal behavior change to convey an "I'm serious about this" message. Your tone of voice shifts to convey nonverbally that you are serious about what you're saying, and you do want a decent response. You may use a bit more volume. You may enunciate or talk slower to create more emphasis. You might make compelling eye contact. Maybe you lean forward a little bit or move closer to the person. Without being assaultive or aggressive in either what you say or how you say it, you want the person to know that you do mean what you say. At muscle level 2, you might ask for a response. You might say, "You haven't said anything. How do you feel about what I've said?" Or, "I don't know what you mean by nodding. Are you saying you won't do this again?" This might be a good time for active listening to find out if there's something else going on that's part of the problem. Fogging is a special technique that is extremely effective at muscle level 2. Fogging is a 2-step process where you precede your assertion with an acknowledgement that what the other person has just said to you may or may not be true. After this acknowledgement, you then restate your limit. The main point of fogging is that you don't agree with what they've said and you don't disagree with it. You don't get into it. This way you stay on track with the point you're making instead of getting sidetracked by their response, which is unfortunately what frequently happens in confrontations. Fogging is very useful when someone labels your assertion and calls you a name, pushy or demanding or too sensitive or neurotic or whatever. You fog by saying, maybe you see it as neurotic. This is how I feel about it, and I do want my feelings respected. Fogging can also help when others give you reasons for their behavior, yet despite the reasons, you still want things to change. So you fog by saying to a colleague, you may see this job as more important than my other projects. I see it differently, and with my other priority work, there's no way I can finish this for you by 4 o'clock today. You don't always have to explain or continue to explain your feelings or your position. Now on to muscle level 3. While probably most problems can be successfully handled at muscle level 2, occasionally, when words are not enough, action is called for. At muscle level 3, you let the person know what you're going to do if things don't change and you still don't get satisfaction. You inform whoever else is involved ahead of time what the consequence will be if your limits are not respected. It's important to distinguish this from a threat. It's not a threat because your motive is not to scare anyone into changing, which is what your motive is when you're making a threat. Your motive is to inform them so that they can make an informed choice about what they're going to do given that consequence. Telling them ahead of time instead of springing the consequence on them by surprise is actually a favor. It's a considerate thing for you to do, not a threat. Basically, you're giving them one last chance to modify their behavior. Here are some examples of muscle level 3 assertions. If you continue to show up late, I don't want to carpool with you anymore. If you continue to yell at me, I'm going to hang up. Next time you call me a name, I'm leaving. If you don't stop kicking my chair, I'm going to get the manager. If I cannot get proper credit for this return, I want to talk with your supervisor. If you continue saying these kinds of remarks to me, I'm going to personnel with a written complaint. If I'm not going to be given public credit for my work on this project, I don't want to be involved. If you're unwilling to take this dish back and give me another one, I'm not paying for the meal. Be careful at muscle level 3, of course, to say you're going to do something only if you're willing to follow through and actually do it. Otherwise, your bluff might get called, and if you don't do it, you end up teaching people that you don't mean what you say. Sometimes it's tough to think up a feasible action, a consequence that's both realistic and suitable to the situation. You may have to take some time to consider or create options before deciding on an appropriate muscle level 3 consequence. The ultimate consequence is ending a relationship if your limit's not respected. Most limits are not worth this level of consequence, but some are. Even when something is extremely important to you, however, you can usually call into play less drastic action before taking this one. In some situations, you have the option of using either your own or some other power of legitimate authority. With a coworker, you can say, I consider this sexual harassment, and if it continues, I'm filing charges with personnel. Sexual harassment is against the law. You have legitimate power behind your assertion. In other situations, you have no power of authority, and you may be at a loss as to what you can do about a continuing problem other than changing your own attitude or taking your marbles and going home. But even when there's no consequence that you can bring to bear on a situation, it still makes sense to set limits, because lots of times people will honor a polite request even if it can't be enforced. Muscle level 4. Needless to say, if no change occurs once you've informed someone you'll take action, it is time to act. Let's look now at some ways to deal with aggressive reactions, when people try to bully you, yell at you, or treat you offensively. First, there are meta-level limits. This term may sound a bit ominous, but it's not. Meta-level limits means that you stop talking about whatever the initial issue was, and you start setting limits on how you're being treated right at the moment. This process is sometimes called a content process shift, because you shift from the content of the initial problem, your workload or the smoking or the fact that you were ignored at the meeting, and you focus on the new problem, the way the interaction's going. For example, let's say you set limits with someone who is yelling at you. While doing this, the person keeps cutting you off with interruptions. So you set a meta-level limit about this, saying, I don't want to be interrupted. Please let me finish what I'm saying. Meta-level limit setting keeps you from getting stuck in negative or non-productive interchanges. Here are some meta-level limits. I don't want to be called names. I'm having a hard time listening to you when you use that tone of voice. It sounds sarcastic to me. I don't want to be laughed at. I won't stand here and be threatened physically. It seems like we're getting nowhere with this. Maybe we should stop now and talk again later. It feels like all I'm getting is defensiveness from you. Would you please just try to understand what I'm telling you about my feeling and not defend yourself? Besides meta-level limits, another way to respond to aggression is to express what you're willing and not willing to put up with in a situation, to use partial limits. For example, saying, I'm willing to hear your feelings on this, but I'm not willing to be yelled at or called names. Or, I want to work this problem out with you, but I don't want to be threatened. Or, I want a relationship to work, but under no circumstances will I stay in it if you hit me again. Active listening is the third important tool for handling aggression. As I mentioned before, it's probably the most effective means there is of calming someone down who's very angry, anxious, or upset in some way. When someone has lost their temper, active listening lets them know you have heard them and understood what they're saying. You aren't necessarily agreeing with them, but at least you've heard them and accepted what they're saying to you. Conveying this understanding and acceptance is an incredibly powerful way of getting somebody through their emotional crazies. When someone becomes defensive or attacking, if you can set aside your own defensiveness and really listen, trying to truly comprehend what they mean, it produces miracles in calming the situation down. Unfortunately, what usually happens is that crazy energy gets matched with crazy energy, and things just get worse. With active listening, you're saying, wait a minute, I want to understand you. It sounds to me like you felt that I was the one being rude. Is that it? Or you might say, I want to make sure I understand you. You're saying that you were doing this because you thought it was what I wanted you to do? You thought it was a favor to me? You had no idea that I didn't like it? Understanding the angry message acts as a soothing balm to hot emotions. If you misunderstand the message, the person can, of course, clarify what they mean. No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say this. And they'll tell you more. In the back and forth, checking out process of active listening, there's tremendous healing and letting go that occurs when the other person feels understood. The fourth method for dealing with aggression is what's called the broken record technique. When someone is acting very abusive, repetition over and over with a calm, strong delivery can be effective. I do not want to be yelled at. They keep yelling. I do not want to be yelled at. I do not want to be yelled at. You just keep saying it until it gets through. The fifth technique to use with aggression is fogging. Fogging can be very effective with aggressive behavior, saying something like, maybe you've got gripes with me too. I'm willing to talk about those, but right now I want to settle the problem I'm having with you on your housekeeping. In my seminar, I make the point that bullies are too often spared direct, honest feedback because people are intimidated by them. That's not to say that bullies get away with their behavior, but what usually happens is that other people respond to them in passive-aggressive ways. They go underground, they sabotage, they undermine, they withhold from the bully as a means of getting even. So the bullies get theirs, but they don't know where it came from, and consequently they don't learn from it. When you assertively stand up to a bully, the results can be surprisingly positive. No guarantee, of course, that the bully will respect you for your assertion, but there's a good chance that that will happen. There's an interesting example of this kind of success in a nonfiction book called Fatal Vision by Joe McGinnis. Jeff McDonald, the main character in the book, has been assigned to the operating room as a resident surgeon. He's going to be assisting for one of the most brutal, aggressive surgeons in the hospital, a guy with a really bad reputation for being a pusher and a shover, even a knife thrower in the surgery room. The surgeon has a very bad reputation for pushing interns out of his way and being real nasty to them. Once, when McDonald was assisting for this man, he did something that the surgeon didn't like, so the surgeon pushed him. Jeff didn't say anything, just continued to do his job. The surgeon asked him some questions. Jeff answered them. Then something happened that the physician didn't like again. He wanted McDonald to move or something. He gave him an elbow right in the middle of the chest. McDonald gave him a light elbow back and said quietly but firmly, "Listen, I don't have to take that from you. Maybe you don't need me here at the table. I seem to be in the way. If I'm not in your way and you want me here, you'll have to treat me with respect as a physician." His response brought complete silence into the surgery room. McDonald just stood there sweating, feeling right about what he had done, but very unsure about what was going to happen. The surgeon said nothing. For the next 2 weeks, McDonald was treated as a complete gentleman by the man. Finally, he was called in, and the surgeon sat him down and invited him into his thoracic surgery service. The surgeon explained that McDonald's reaction in the operating room had made him stand out as somebody who had self-respect, and he wanted that kind of person on his staff. The last area is an extremely important yet often overlooked area of assertion, letting go gracefully. A lot of people resist the idea that letting go is assertive because they confuse letting go and accepting things with passivity. They mistakenly believe that if you accept something or somebody's behavior, it means you do nothing about the situation and you just become a doormat. Not so. You can accept that things are the way they are and still do whatever you can do to change them or to prevent the problem from reoccurring. Other people confuse accepting with opinions. They think that if they accept a situation, they have to like it. Not so either. You can accept a situation, let go gracefully, yet still see it as completely unfair or wrong. Letting go has nothing to do with your opinions. Letting go gracefully is an inner surrender based on intelligent choice, not defeat. It's a conscious, assertive recognition of what is so and what is not so. It means you don't fight reality, even if you don't like it. I compare it to getting stuck in a traffic jam. Accepting that you're stuck in a traffic jam doesn't mean you like it, doesn't mean you don't look around to see what you can do to get out of the jam. Accepting it merely means that you don't make it harder on yourself by fighting the situation with a temper tantrum, bitching and moaning about your rotten luck, convincing yourself it's going to be the end of the world if you miss your flight. Letting go and accepting the situation when you've done what you can do and can do no more is a very intelligent move. It saves your energy, and it keeps your mind clear and open to the possibilities for either solving the dilemma or taking advantage of it even. To help yourself let go gracefully in life, learn to operate from the level of preference instead of demand. One of the things I learned from a wonderful self-help book called How to Enjoy Your Life in Spite of It All is that when you upgrade your desires to preferences, you dramatically increase your personal freedom. When you believe that getting your way is essential to your happiness, you paint yourself into a corner. If instead you keep desires as something you'd like to have but can survive just fine without, you give yourself a lot of flexibility and considerable power. Usually it's just an illusion anyway that you must have something, as we saw when we looked at must-have thinking a while ago. Once in a while, of course, you may decide that something is non-negotiable, and you absolutely insist on it if you're going to stay in a relationship or stay in a situation. You have a right to decide that. You have a right to decide to draw the line, saying, this is it. I won't put up with any more than this. There are some things you'll go to the wall for. Most things don't belong in that category, though, and you need to know which are which. Sometimes in life, like it or not, you're in a position where you have to put up with something, where your degrees of freedom are limited or your choices are primarily internal ones of attitude rather than action. For example, if you're being held hostage by terrorists, setting limits with the terrorists about the treatment you're getting can be very costly. It can put you 6 feet under. Looking realistically at situations, knowing clearly what you're willing or unwilling, able or unable to do about them, and accepting the realities you can't change, even if you don't like them, increases your personal power and gives you more options, not less. This kind of letting go and accepting is an important part of getting along in life successfully, no matter what. For those things that you prefer and don't get, keep a positive attitude about letting go. Don't confuse it with giving up. Letting go and accepting is your smartest move. It's an assertive move, not a passive one. You can still use any and all channels of pursuing your preference if there are some. When you run out of options, or if what you try still doesn't work, then it's time for letting go and accepting, at least for the time being. It can help at a moment like this to depersonalize, to remind yourself that the situation is most likely not about you personally. It can also help to remind yourself of the relativity of it all, to remember it could always be worse, to think of others who do have it worse, to count the blessings you have in spite of the situation, and to remind yourself that all things do pass. To help yourself adopt this spirit of letting go, avoid what Wayne Dyer calls the justice trap. A lot of anger and frustration is generated when we expect justice in life and don't get it. As Dyer says, it's futile to always expect and look for justice. It's as futile as looking for the fountain of youth. He points out that nature is inherently unjust. Let's face it, if life were fair, birds wouldn't eat worms, spiders wouldn't eat flies, cougars wouldn't eat coyotes. Nature shows you by natural disasters and who eats whom that justice is a myth. Of course, justice does exist sometimes, but not always. To expect it to always be the case, to expect fairness to always rule, is unrealistic, and it's a setup for personal misery. Your choice to be happy has nothing to do with justice or fairness. You can ask for justice. You can seek it. You can design a world and relationships where there's a high sense of justice and fairness. These are all viable, realistic, worthy goals. but you can drive yourself nuts if you grow to expect it as a given or a must-have. As Dyer says, the backdrop for virtually all neuroses is making others' behavior more significant than your own. He suggests that you make a list of everything in the world you think is unfair and see if any of them will go away by your opinion or your upset reactions. Another strategy in accepting life's unfairness, when you can't change it, is by saying calmly to yourself, "It's unfortunate, I'd prefer things were different," and not say, "That's not fair." Learning how to set limits has been the keystone of my own path to assertion and personal growth. I'm convinced it is one of the most exciting and significant areas of growth for all of us. I believe it's a key to creating harmony, peace, and lots of room for difference on our small planetary home, Earth. I want to share with you a beautiful poem that captures the spirit of letting go. Unfortunately, I don't know who wrote this. I share it with you in hopes that it will do the same for you when you've done what you can do about a problem and still don't get what you want. It's called To Let Go. To let go is not to stop caring. It's recognizing I can't do it for someone else. To let go is not to cut myself off. It's realizing I can't control another. To let go is not to enable, but to allow learning from natural consequences. To let go is not to fight powerlessness, but to accept that the outcome is not always in my hands. To let go is not to try to change or blame others. It's to make the most of myself. To let go is not to care for, it's to care about. To let go is not to fix, it's to be supportive. To let go is not to judge, it's to allow another to be a human being. To let go is not to try to arrange outcomes, but to allow others to affect their own destinies. To let go is not to be protective, it's to permit another to face their own reality. To let go is not to regulate anyone, but to strive to become what I dream I can be. To let go is not to fear less, it's to love more.
We hope this tape program has provided you with some valuable ideas and strategies. Your next step is to put them to use in your own life. The best way to do this is to start immediately. Research shows that if you implement a new idea within 24 hours of learning it, you're far more likely to integrate it permanently. In other words, don't let a good idea get away. By the way, if you think you might want to share the benefits of How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No, or any of CareerTrack's seminars, all of the programs can be presented live at your company or organization. You can choose from a full day to 1 hour version of the presentation. To discuss arrangements for your own private seminar, please call CareerTrack's on-site department toll-free at 1-800-325-5854. CareerTrack offers a wealth of books, tapes, and seminars on other topics designed to increase your effectiveness. These include stress management, time management, image building, self-motivation, communication, human relations, and many more programs, all with one aim: keeping you at your best. For a catalog and more information on any of these proven career-boosting products and services, call this convenient toll-free number, 1-800-336-9972. And now another treat, a sample of CareerTrack's best-selling Assertiveness Training Program. The trainer is noted psychologist and seminar leader Dr. Helga Rohde. Since setting limits is one of many assertiveness skills, Assertiveness Training is a perfect companion program to How to Speak Up, Set Limits, and Say No. Here's the sample.
Fogging, on the other hand, is an excellent strategy for dealing with manipulative criticism. Fogging means that when somebody says, you should have done this differently, you know you wouldn't be in this kind of fix if you had done it differently. All you have to do is respond by either agreeing with some truth or agreeing with the odds or in principle. We sometimes say that fogging is like throwing a ball into a bank of fog. It doesn't do any harm. There's no resistance. It does not come back, and nobody knows where it went. Illustrate this. When I first began traveling as a trainer, I didn't know that I had to dress on the plane very similarly to how I dress for a seminar, because my suitcase quite often goes in a different direction than I do. and it travels many more miles than I do. And I found myself wearing very leisurely clothes on the plane. My suitcase didn't arrive. I had nothing to wear to go on stage with the next morning. And I looked everywhere for that suitcase. Finally, out of desperation, I called my husband in Denver, and I said, would you please call the airline and see if you can find my suitcase so I don't have to make all these long-distance phone calls. It's got to be somewhere. Maybe it's still sitting at the airport. Here's what Honey said to me. You know, if you had done what I had told you, if you had packed your stuff on carry-on luggage, it wouldn't be lost. Can anybody see the potential of a fight here? Any of you? Right. Years ago, before I knew about fogging, here's exactly how I would have responded. I can guarantee it. I would have said, now, how many times do I have to tell you that I can't fit all my stuff on carry-on luggage? To which he would have said, well, that's because you always carry too much junk around with you. Now, I couldn't have left it at that. I couldn't. Last word, me. Probably would have said, now comes the punch below the belt. Just because you don't care what you look like doesn't mean I don't care what I look like. Are we still talking about finding the suitcase? If things had gone well, we would have somehow backtracked and maybe gotten back to the point. But chances are also so that we would have shouted some more things at each other and one of us would have hung up the phone. Nothing accomplished. Since I learned about fogging, okay, here's how I handled that one. When he said, now mind you, you've got to be a good listener in order to respond that way. When he said, you should have done what I told you, you should have packed your stuff on carry-on luggage, there are some things I will not agree with. And one of them is to say, you are right, I should have done what you told me. I would rather bite my tongue off than to say that. But of course I don't have to say that, do I? But I can seemingly agree with maybe I should have packed my stuff on carry-on luggage. Now here's how I put it. I said, well, you're probably right. If I had packed my stuff on carry-on luggage, it may not be lost. What have I just done? Have I said anything? Have I said anything? All I have said, anything is possible in the world. Right? I didn't say you're right and I'm wrong. I didn't say yes, I should have. I didn't say, yeah, I was stupid again. Nothing. I said maybe. If I had done this, maybe this would have happened. I mean, maybe, possibly, could be. Now, he doesn't know that, though, does he? All he knows is that he doesn't know what to say. Because what he's going to say now, right? It sounds as though she agreed with me. And so that's all I said. And then I used the broken record. I said, however, would you please call the airline and see if you can find my suitcase? And so he tried one more time, and he said, yeah, but, you know, you could have saved yourself all that problem if you had just packed your luggage on carry-on. And you wouldn't always insist on checking in your luggage. So what did I say? Well, maybe so. Maybe it would have helped if I had packed my stuff on carry-on luggage and wouldn't have checked it in. Now, would you please call the airline and see if you can find my suitcase? I'm telling you right now, this technique will save you more arguments. It'll save you more anguish than a lot of things that I could have taught you today. At least that has been true for me.
This has been a sample of Assertiveness Training by Dr. Helga Rohde. To get your copy of this top-selling audio cassette tape program, simply call Career Track toll-free at 1-800-334-1018. Keep in mind that all Career Track products carry a full 1-year unconditional guarantee. This means that if you order from Career Track, you have up to a year to listen before deciding if you want to keep it. And if you don't, just return it and we'll gladly refund your money. Thank you for listening, and congratulations on making Career Track your success company.